Hello, friends. Welcome to the Sleep Aliens. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever seen something that defies explanation? Something that makes your watch lose its meaning and your memory feel confused? That's exactly what happened to Dalton Ridgway at the 7th pump. A perfect ring of light suspended in the air, silent, motionless. When Hector arrived, the light disappeared. But what kept Dalton awake at night was this. According to his watch, he was 2 minutes late. According to Hector's watch, it was 9 minutes. And the metal pier where the light had been? It was hot enough to burn your skin. I've gone too far. Let me start from the beginning. West Texas isn't a place you come to by accident. It's the kind of place you come to when other places don't suit you, when you're trying to escape something, or when you no longer care about comfort and convenience. The land here doesn't care about you or what you do. Miles of brush, calichy roads that will tear your truck apart, and wind that howls incessantly across the plains. Dalton Ridgway had been working the oil fields for going on 7 years when this happened. He wasn't young anymore. 42, with a face weathered by sun and wind until it looked like cracked leather. But he wasn't old either. Just worn. The kind of worn you get when you've spent too many nights in a trailer that rattles in the wind, too many days fixing equipment that breaks down every other week, too many months away from anything resembling a normal life. He'd come out to West Texas from Oklahoma after his marriage fell apart. No kids, thank God. Just a wife who'd gotten tired of waiting for him to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. The oil fields paid decent money if you didn't mind the work, and Dalton found he didn't mind it much at all. There was something honest about it. You showed up, you did your job, you went home. No office politics, no pretending to care about things that didn't matter. Just you and the equipment and the endless sky. Hector Moran was different. 28 years old, originally from Eagle Pass down on the border. He'd been working the fields for 3 years, saving money to buy a garage back home. Hector was the kind of guy who could fix anything with duct tape and wire, who always had a joke ready, who made the long nights go by faster. He and Dalton had been paired up on night shift for the past 6 months, and they'd developed the kind of easy partnership that comes from spending too many hours together in the middle of nowhere. Night shift in the oil fields is a strange thing. The world narrows down to the circle of light from your headlamp, the red glow of equipment indicators, the rhythmic chunk of the pumps pulling crude from deep underground. You get used to the isolation. You get used to the sounds. You get used to the way your eyes play tricks on you after midnight when you've been staring at the same equipment for hours. But some things you never get used to. It was a Tuesday night in late September when it happened. The heat of the day had finally broken, and the temperature had dropped down into the low 60s. Perfect weather for outdoor work. The sky was clear. No moon yet, but so many stars you could read by them if you had to. Dalton always loved the night sky out here. No light pollution for 100 miles in any direction. Just you and the universe, the company they worked for, Permian Basin Operations, a mid-sized outfit that operated about 40 wells scattered across a 300-square-mile area, ran a skeleton crew at night. Just 2-man teams driving circuits, checking pressure gauges, making sure nothing was leaking or breaking down. Dalton and Hector's route covered 12 wells, starting at sunset and finishing around dawn. Most nights nothing went wrong. You'd hit each well, check the equipment, log the readings, and move on. Pump 7 was one of the older wells on their route. It sat about 40 miles out from the nearest town, accessible only by a calichy road that turned to soup when it rained. The pump itself was a standard pumpjack, what locals called a nodding donkey, with the familiar rocking motion as it drew oil from the formation below. The site had a small metal scaffold where the storage tanks sat, some electrical equipment in a weathered box, and a gravel pad for vehicles to park. Dalton arrived at Pump 7 around 11:47 p.m. He knew the exact time because he checked his watch before he got out of the truck. It was a habit he'd developed. Always note the time when you arrive at a site. That way, if anything went wrong, you had a record. The pump was working normally when he arrived. Chunk, 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 the familiar rhythm. He grabbed his clipboard and headlamp and walked over to the gauge panel. Everything looked normal. Pressure was good. Temperature was good. No leaks visible. He marked down the readings and was about to head back to the truck when he noticed something odd. The air felt different. Not cold exactly, but charged. Like right before a thunderstorm, when the atmosphere gets heavy and your hair stands up. But there were no clouds. The sky was perfectly clear. Dalton looked up. That's when he saw it. Directly above Pump 7, maybe 50 feet up, there was a ring of light. Not a solid ring, more like a circle of individual lights, perfectly spaced, forming a complete circle about 20 feet in diameter. The lights weren't moving. They weren't making any sound. They were just there, hanging in the air, glowing with a pale white-blue color that didn't quite look natural. Dalton stood there, clipboard hanging from his hand, staring up at the ring. His first thought was that it was some kind of drone, but he didn't hear any motors, no helicopter blades, no sound at all except the chunk, chunk, chunk of the pump. His second thought was that it was some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, ball lightning, maybe, or something like that. But ball lightning didn't form perfect geometric shapes and hover in place. His third thought, the one he didn't want to have, was that it was something else entirely. The lights were steady, unblinking. Dalton found himself counting them. 12 individual lights, evenly spaced around the circle. Each one about the size of a softball from his perspective on the ground. They cast a faint glow on the metal scaffold below them, painting everything in that cold, white-blue color. Dalton's heart was hammering in his chest. He wanted to look away, wanted to get back in his truck and drive away, but he couldn't move. He was transfixed. The lights were beautiful in a way he couldn't quite describe. Hypnotic. He don't know how long he stood there looking up at the ring. Could have been 30 seconds. Could have been 5 minutes. Time had gone strange, elastic, but eventually his training kicked in. Document everything. That was the rule. If something unusual happens, write it down, take photos if you can, and report it to the supervisor. Dalton reached for his phone in his pocket. The movement broke whatever spell had been holding him frozen. He raised the phone, aimed the camera at the lights above, and pressed the button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. The phone was dead. Battery had been at 60% when he'd arrived, but now the screen was completely black. He pressed the power button. Nothing. "What the hell?" Dalton muttered. He pocketed the phone and looked back up at the ring. The lights were still there. Still perfectly still. Still silent. That's when Dalton noticed something else. The air around him had gotten colder. A lot colder. He could see his breath now, misting in the air. But it had been in the low 60s when he'd arrived. Now it felt like it was below freezing. And there was a smell. Faint, but definitely there. Like ozone, or burning metal, or something electrical that had shorted out. It made the inside of Dalton's nose prickle. He took a step backward, then another. His eyes never left the ring of lights. He was maybe 10 feet from his truck now. If he ran, he could get there in a couple seconds. Start the engine, drive away, leave this weird shit behind. But he didn't run. Something kept him rooted in place. Curiosity, stubbornness, fear that if he looked away the lights would do something. He didn't know. The lights began to pulse, not dramatically, just a subtle brightening and dimming like they were breathing. The rhythm was slow and regular. Bright, dim. Bright, dim. Bright, dim. And with each pulse, Dalton felt something in his chest. Not painful, but present. Like a bass note you feel more than hear. His watch started beeping. Dalton tore his eyes away from the lights and looked down at his wrist. His digital watch, a cheap Casio he'd bought at Walmart 5 years ago, was going haywire. The display was flashing random numbers. 88, 88, 00, 23, 47, 91, 19. The alarm was beeping continuously, that annoying little electronic chirp. He pressed buttons trying to make it stop, but nothing worked. The watch kept flashing, kept beeping. When Dalton looked back up, the ring of lights was dimming, not pulsing anymore. Actually fading, growing fainter and fainter, like someone was turning down a dimmer switch. Within seconds they were gone completely. The only light now came from his headlamp and the distant glow of the pump's indicator lights. The cold began to recede almost immediately. The smell faded. The charged feeling in the air dissipated. Everything went back to normal, except Dalton's watch, which was still beeping and flashing. He stood there in the darkness, breathing hard, trying to process what he'd just seen. The ring had been real, he was sure of that. He hadn't imagined it. It had been right there, solid and present and impossible to ignore. But now it was gone, and he was alone in the middle of the West Texas desert with a malfunctioning watch and a dead phone, and no proof that anything had happened at all. That's when he saw headlights approaching from the south. Hector, coming to meet him at Pump 7 like they'd planned. They always coordinated their routes so they'd overlap at a couple wells each night. Gave them a chance to take a break together, shoot the shit, make sure neither of them had run into any problems. Dalton felt a wave of relief wash over him. He wasn't alone. Hector would confirm what he'd seen. The ring had to have been visible for miles around. Hector must have seen it too. Hector's truck pulled up next to Dalton's and the younger man hopped out, grinning like always. "Hey man, how's it going? Everything good out here?" "Hector," Dalton said, his voice coming out rougher than he'd intended. "Did you see it?" Hector's grin faded. "See what?" "The lights, the ring, right above the pump. Tell me you saw it." Hector looked up at the sky, then back at Dalton. "I didn't see anything." "What lights?" There was a ring of lights right above the scaffold, 12 of them, perfectly spaced. They were just hanging there for I don't know how long. You had to have seen them. You were driving this direction. Hector's expression had shifted from confusion to concern. "Dalton, I didn't see any lights. Are you feeling okay? You look kind of pale." "I'm fine," Dalton snapped. "I'm telling you, there were lights, right there." He pointed up at the space where the ring had been. Okay, Hector said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I believe you, but I swear I didn't see anything from the road. Maybe they were gone by the time I got close." "Maybe," Dalton said, but he didn't sound convinced. He fumbled with his watch, finally managing to silence the alarm. The display was still acting erratic, but at least it wasn't beeping anymore. "What's up with your watch?" Hector asked. "It went crazy when the lights were here. Phone, too. It's dead now." Hector pulled out his own phone and checked the time. "It's 11:56. You got here around 11:45, right?" "Yeah," Dalton said. Then he processed what Hector had said. He looked down at his watch. Through the flashing numbers he could make out something that looked like 11:49. "Wait, what time did you say it was?" 11:56. That can't be right. I've only been here a couple minutes. Hector showed him his phone screen. 11:56 p.m. That's what my phone says. When did the lights show up? Dalton's mind was racing. I don't know. Right after I got here. Maybe 30 seconds after I checked my watch, and they were there for, I don't know. Felt like 2 minutes, 3 at most. Dalton, Hector said slowly. If you got here at 11:47 and it's now 11:56, that's 9 minutes. No. Dalton shook his head. No, that doesn't make sense. I wasn't standing here for 9 minutes. It was 2 minutes tops. Hector didn't argue. Instead, he walked over to the pump scaffold and reached up to touch the metal framework. He jerked his hand back immediately. Shit, that's hot. Dalton walked over and carefully placed his palm near the metal. He could feel the heat radiating off it from 6 inches away. Jesus, what the hell? How is it this hot? Hector asked. It's been dark for hours. There's no sun to heat it up. The two men stood there staring at the scaffold. The metal was definitely hot enough that you couldn't hold it for more than a second. But there was no visible reason for it. No fire, no electrical short, nothing. Where exactly was the ring? Hector asked. Dalton pointed. Right there, about 50 feet up, centered on the scaffold. Hector looked up, then back at the hot metal. You think the lights did this? Heated up the metal somehow? I don't know what to think. We should report this. Report what? Dalton asked bitterly. That I saw some lights? That my watch freaked out? That 9 minutes went by when it felt like 2? And that the metal scaffold is hot for no reason, Hector added. They'll think I'm crazy. I don't think you're crazy, Hector said. Something weird happened here. We should tell the supervisor. Dalton sighed and ran his hand through his hair. His watch had finally stopped flashing and was displaying 11:58 p.m., close enough to what Hector's phone showed. Yeah, okay, we'll report it. But first, let's finish the route. I want to check the other wells, make sure everything else is normal. You sure you're okay to keep working? I'm fine, just shaken up. Come on, let's get out of here. They climbed into their respective trucks. Dalton tried his phone one more time, but it was still dead. He'd have to charge it when he got back to the trailer. As he pulled away from Pump 7, Dalton glanced in his rearview mirror. The scaffold was dark and silent, the pump still nodding away like nothing unusual had happened. But something had happened. Dalton knew it in his bones. He'd seen something up there. Something that didn't belong. Something that had stolen 7 minutes from his life and left behind nothing but a hot piece of metal and a malfunctioning watch. And deep down, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, Dalton had a feeling this wasn't over. The rest of the night passed without incident. Dalton and Hector hit the remaining wells on their route, logged the readings, found everything operating normally. They didn't talk much. Dalton was lost in his own thoughts, replaying those missing minutes over and over, trying to remember if there was anything else, any detail he'd forgotten. But his memory of the event was crystal clear up to a point, and then fuzzy after. He remembered seeing the ring, counting the lights, feeling the cold, hearing his watch go crazy. But the transition from the lights being there to the lights being gone felt slippery, like trying to remember a dream. Had they faded gradually, winked out all at once? He couldn't quite recall. The sun was just starting to paint the eastern horizon orange when they finally pulled into the yard where the company kept the trucks. The day shift crew was already there, drinking coffee from thermoses, preparing for their own rounds. Dalton's supervisor, a heavy-set man named Bill Kowalski, was standing by the office trailer. When he saw Dalton and Hector approaching, he waved them over. "Morning, boys. How was the shift?" Dalton and Hector exchanged a glance. "Mostly quiet," Hector said. "But we had something weird happen at Pump 7. "Weird how?" Dalton took a breath. "I saw something, lights in the sky, and the metal scaffold got really hot, even though there was no reason for it." Bill's expression didn't change. He'd been running crews in the oil patch for 25 years, and not much surprised him anymore. "Lights in the sky? What kind of lights?" "A ring, about 20 feet across, hovering 50 feet above the pump. 12 individual lights, white-blue color. They were there for a couple minutes, then disappeared." "You get any pictures?" "Phone died, and my watch went haywire." Bill looked at Hector. "You see these lights?" "No, sir. I was still on the road, but when I got to 7, the scaffold was definitely hot. Too hot to touch." Bill pulled out his own phone and made a note. "All right, I'll send a day crew out to check the electrical on 7. Make sure nothing's shorting out. Could be you saw some kind of St. Elmo's fire or something. Happens sometimes around electrical equipment." "This wasn't St. Elmo's fire," Dalton said. "Maybe not, but we'll check it out anyway. You boys head home, get some sleep. If there's any follow-up questions, I'll call you." That was that. No dramatics, no accusations of lying or losing his mind. Just a note in a logbook and a promise to investigate. Bill had been in the fields long enough to know that strange things happened sometimes, and most of them had rational explanations. But as Dalton drove back to his trailer, a single wide he rented on the outskirts of a town called No Trees, he couldn't shake the feeling that no rational explanation was going to cover what he'd seen. The trailer was sweltering inside. Dalton turned on the air conditioning unit, which coughed and rattled but eventually started pushing out cool air. He plugged his phone into the charger and waited to see if it would come back to life. After 5 minutes, the screen flickered and the Apple logo appeared. The phone booted up like normal, showing 7:23 a.m. and a dozen notifications from apps he rarely checked. Everything seemed to be working fine now. Dalton scrolled through his photo gallery just to confirm what he already knew. No pictures from last night. The last photo was from 2 days ago, a shot of a sunset he thought was pretty. He tossed the phone onto the couch and pulled off his boots. His whole body ached with exhaustion, but his mind was racing. He knew he should sleep, but every time he closed his eyes he saw that ring of lights burning in his memory. After lying in bed for an hour staring at the ceiling, Dalton gave up. He got up, made a pot of coffee that could strip paint, and sat down at his laptop. If he was going to figure out what he'd seen, he needed information. And thanks to the internet, information was easy to come by, maybe too easy. He started with simple searches. Lights in the sky, West Texas. Ring of lights, UFO. Missing time phenomena. The results were a mix of legitimate astronomy sites, paranormal blogs, conspiracy theory forums, and news articles about various sightings. Dalton had never been particularly interested in UFOs or aliens or any of that stuff. He'd seen a few movies, sure. E.T. when he was a kid. Independence Day in the theater. But he'd never given serious thought to whether we were alone in the universe or whether strange lights in the sky meant something otherworldly. Now he was reading accounts from people all over the world who'd seen similar things. Rings of light, missing time, equipment malfunctions, strange heat signatures. Some of the stories were obviously fake or exaggerated, but others had a ring of truth to them, a matter-of-fact quality that reminded Dalton of his own experience. One account in particular caught his attention. A truck driver in Arizona had reported seeing a ring of lights hovering over I-10 back in 2014. He'd pulled over to watch, and his truck's engine had died. When the lights disappeared, he tried to restart the truck, and it started right up. But his clock, which had read 2:47 a.m. when he pulled over, now read 3:19 a.m. He'd lost 32 minutes. The guy had reported it to the police, who'd told him he'd probably fallen asleep. but he insisted he'd been wide awake the whole time. He could remember every detail of what he'd seen, except the actual passage of those missing minutes. Dalton felt a chill run down his spine. The similarity to his own experience was uncanny. Down to the detail about time loss and equipment failure. He kept reading. Site after site, story after story. Some in the U.S., some in other countries. Different years, different circumstances, but recurring themes. Lights in geometric patterns. Vehicles stopping for no reason. Watches and phones going haywire. Memory gaps. Not all the accounts involved rings. Some described triangular formations, or straight lines of lights, or single orbs. But the effects were similar. Time distortion, electromagnetic interference, a sense of disorientation or unreality. By noon, Dalton's eyes were burning from staring at the screen, and his head was full of information that didn't quite add up to answers. He knew what he'd seen. He knew it was real. But knowing that didn't help him understand what it meant or why it had happened. His phone buzzed, a text from Hector. "You sleeping or still freaking out about last night?" Dalton smiled despite himself and typed back. "Still freaking out. Can't sleep." "Same. Want to get breakfast? Or lunch, I guess, since it's noon." "Yeah. Meet you at that diner in Kermit in 30? See you there." The Sagebrush Diner was exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find in West Texas. Faded turquoise exterior, neon sign that only partially worked, interior that hadn't been updated since the 1980s. But the food was good and cheap, and it was a popular spot for oilfield workers coming off night shifts. Hector was already in a booth when Dalton arrived, working on a plate of huevos rancheros. Dalton slid into the seat across from him and ordered coffee and a burger from the waitress. "You look terrible," Hector said cheerfully. "Gee, thanks." "Seriously, did you sleep at all?" "No, I've been online all morning, reading about other sightings. Hector, there are hundreds of reports just like what I saw. Thousands, maybe. People seeing weird lights, losing time, having equipment fail." Hector set down his fork. "You think there's something to it? Like, actually something out there?" "I don't know what to think. But I know what I saw wasn't normal. And all these other people, they can't all be lying or crazy. Did you find any explanations? Like anything scientific?" "Lots of theories. Atmospheric phenomena, ball lightning, plasma formations, temperature inversions that create optical illusions, but none of that explains the missing time, or the heat on the scaffold." The waitress brought Dalton's coffee, and he wrapped his hands around the mug, grateful for the warmth despite the afternoon heat outside. "Bill's sending a crew to check the electrical at Pump 7, see if they find anything. And if they don't, then I guess we just chalk it up to one of those weird things that happen sometimes." Hector was quiet for a moment, pushing rice around his plate. "I believe you, you know, about what you saw. I don't think you made it up. Thanks. But I gotta ask, are you scared? Like, do you think whatever it was might come back?" Dalton considered the question. Was he scared? He'd been too busy being confused and frustrated to really examine his emotional state. But now that Hector asked, he realized the answer was yes. He was scared, not terrified, not panicked, but definitely unsettled in a way he couldn't quite articulate. "Yeah," he admitted. "A little. It's the not knowing that gets to me. If I knew what it was, even if the answer was something crazy, at least I'd know. But this is just questions with no answers. Maybe that's all it'll ever be. A weird thing that happened once and then never again. Maybe." But Dalton didn't believe that. Deep in his gut, he had a feeling that last night at Pump 7 wasn't an isolated incident. It was the beginning of something. 2 weeks passed. Dalton returned to his normal routine: work, sleep, repeat. The day crew reported that all the electrical equipment at Pump 7 was functioning normally. No shorts, no damage, no explanation for why the scaffold had been hot. Bill logged it as an anomaly and moved on. In the oil fields, you dealt with the problems you could fix and didn't worry too much about the ones you couldn't. But Dalton couldn't move on. Every night when he drove past Pump 7, he felt his heart rate pick up. He'd slow down, scan the sky above the well, looking for any sign of the lights. But there was never anything there, just stars and darkness, and the familiar silhouette of the pumpjack nodding away. His watch had returned to normal function. No more random beeping or flashing numbers. And his phone worked fine. It was like the whole incident had been wiped clean, leaving no trace except in his memory. Hector didn't bring it up much. They'd talk about other things during their shifts: sports, Hector's plans for his garage, a girl Hector was seeing in Monahan's. Normal stuff, but occasionally Dalton would catch Hector looking at him with a concerned expression, like he was checking to make sure Dalton wasn't about to lose it. Then, 3 weeks after the first incident, something else happened. It was a Tuesday again. Dalton had noticed that, though he told himself it was probably just coincidence. He was at Pump 12, the furthest well on their route, out in an area where the roads were so rough you had to drive in four-wheel drive even when it was dry. The pump was running fine. Dalton logged the readings and was walking back to his truck when he felt it again. That charged feeling in the air, the sense that something was wrong, off kilter, not quite right. He stopped and looked up. No ring this time. Instead, there were 3 lights arranged in a perfect triangle, hovering about 100 feet above the pump. They were the same white-blue color he'd seen before, but these were larger, more like basketballs than softballs. Dalton's first instinct was to run to his truck, start it up, and get the hell out of there. But he fought the impulse. Last time, he'd had no proof. His phone had died, he'd been alone, and everyone had written it off as some kind of malfunction or misidentification. Not this time. He pulled out his phone, fully charged, working perfectly, and raised it to take a video. His hands were shaking, but he managed to tap the record button. The triangle of lights hung there, motionless. Dalton zoomed in as much as the phone would allow, trying to capture as much detail as possible. The lights weren't solid. They seemed to pulse very slightly, like they were breathing, and they were definitely casting light downward. He could see the pump and the equipment bathed in that eerie white-blue glow. "Come on," Dalton muttered to his phone. "Don't you dare die on me now." The phone kept recording. 30 seconds, 45, 1 minute. Then the lights began to move, not fast. Slowly, deliberately, they shifted positions. The triangle rotated, maintaining its perfect geometric shape, turning 90 degrees over the course of maybe 10 seconds. Then it rotated back. Then it tilted, so the triangle was no longer horizontal, but at an angle. Dalton kept filming, his heart hammering. This was definitely not ball lightning or St. Elmo's fire or any natural phenomenon. This was controlled movement, intelligent movement. The lights completed their tilting motion and returned to horizontal. Then they began to pulse in sequence. First one, then the second, then the third, then back to the first. A rhythm, a pattern. And that's when Dalton heard it. A sound, very faint, almost at the edge of hearing. A low hum, like a power line in the distance or a large transformer. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, felt as much in his chest and teeth as heard with his ears. His watch started beeping again. "No, no, no," Dalton said. He glanced down. The watch was flashing, cycling through random numbers just like before. He looked at his phone. The recording was still going. He could see the timestamp continuing to count up. 3 minutes now. When he looked back up, the triangle of lights was changing. The 3 points were spreading apart, the triangle getting larger. And as it expanded, Dalton realized he could see something in the center. Something dark, solid, blocking out the stars. A craft, an actual physical object. It was hard to make out details because of the lights and the darkness, but Dalton could see enough to know it wasn't any aircraft he recognized. The shape was all wrong. Too smooth, too seamless, like it had been molded from a single piece of material. No rivets, no seams, no obvious propulsion system. The 3 lights, he realized, weren't separate objects. They were part of the larger craft, positioned at 3 points along its edge. The craft rotated slowly, giving Dalton a view of its underside. Still too dark to see clearly, but he could make out a texture that looked almost organic, like the shell of some enormous beetle. 4 minutes on the recording now. The humming sound grew louder. Dalton felt it vibrating in his bones. The air had gotten cold again, his breath misting. The smell of ozone was strong. And then the craft began to descend. Not quickly, just a slow, controlled lowering, coming down toward the pump, toward Dalton. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get in his truck and floor it. But his legs wouldn't move. He was frozen in place, phone still raised, recording everything. 50 feet above the pump now, 40 feet, 30, close enough that Dalton could see the craft in detail now. It was enormous, at least 60 feet across. The underside was divided into sections, panels of that same dark material with the 3 lights set into it like eyes. And in the very center there was an opening, a circular aperture, darker than the rest, like a pupil dilating, 20 feet above the pump. The opening in the center of the craft began to glow. A different color this time, deep red, like heated metal. The glow pulsed in time with the humming sound. 10 feet. Dalton could feel heat now, radiating down from the craft. The same kind of heat that had made the scaffold too hot to touch 3 weeks ago. And then, just like last time, everything went strange. Dalton's perception seemed to skip. One moment he was standing there, filming, watching the craft descend. The next moment he was sitting in his truck, hands on the steering wheel, engine running. He blinked, disoriented. What the hell? How had he gotten in the truck? He didn't remember walking over, didn't remember opening the door or starting the engine. He looked out the windshield. The sky was empty. No lights, no craft, just stars. Dalton's hands were still shaking. He looked at his watch. 1:42 a.m. When had he arrived at Pump 12? He thought back. He'd logged the time when he'd gotten out of the truck. 1:09 a.m. That meant 33 minutes had passed. 33 minutes he couldn't remember. His phone was on the passenger seat. Dalton grabbed it with trembling fingers and opened the video gallery. There was a video file. Recorded tonight. He tapped it. The video began playing. There he was, pointing the phone at the sky, filming the triangle of lights. The quality wasn't great. Phone cameras never did well in low light, but you could clearly see 3 lights in a triangular formation. You could see them rotating, pulsing in sequence. The video ran for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Then it stopped. Not gradually, not with Dalton lowering the phone. It just ended abruptly, cutting to black mid-frame. Dalton rewound and watched it again. Same thing. 4 minutes, 17 seconds, then nothing. But he'd been standing there for longer than 4 minutes. He knew he had been. He remembered watching the craft descend, remembered seeing the opening in the center start to glow. Where was the rest of the video? And more importantly, what had happened during those missing 33 minutes? Dalton sat in his truck, engine idling, trying to piece together his fragmented memory. He could remember bits and pieces after the video cut off. The sensation of heat. A sound louder than the humming, something like wind rushing through a tunnel. A feeling of weightlessness, like falling but not down, more like falling sideways or up. And light, so much light. Red and white and something else, a color he didn't have a name for. But nothing concrete, nothing he could hold on to. Just sensory impressions and emotions, confusion, fear, wonder, and underneath it all, a strange sense of calm, like part of him had known this was going to happen and had accepted it. He looked at the pump. Still nodding away, chunk, chunk, chunk. He got out of the truck on shaky legs and walked over to check the equipment. The metal scaffold was hot. Not as hot as last time. He could touch it for a second or two before having to pull away, but definitely warmer than it should have been. And there was something else. On the ground beneath the scaffold, the gravel had been disturbed, not scattered like someone had kicked it, more like it had been pushed outward in a perfect circle, leaving a clear patch of bare earth about 10 feet in diameter. In the center of the circle, the ground looked different, darker. Dalton knelt down and touched it. The soil was warm and had a glassy texture, like it had been melted and then cooled. Jesus Christ, whatever had happened here, it had been real. The video proved the lights existed. The soil proved something physical had occurred. This wasn't a hallucination or a waking dream. Dalton pulled out his phone to call Hector, then realized it was the middle of their shift. Hector was probably at another well, 50 miles away. No point in calling him now. Better to finish the route and tell him in person. But Dalton knew one thing for certain as he climbed back into his truck. This wasn't going to stop. Whatever was happening out here in the West Texas darkness, whatever intelligence was piloting those crafts, it had shown up twice now. And something told him there would be a third time. The question was, what did it want? And why had it chosen Dalton? Dalton didn't finish his route that night. He drove straight back to the yard, parked his truck and sat in the cab for 20 minutes trying to decide what to do. The smart thing would be to report it immediately. Show Bill the video. Tell him about the missing time. Show him the melted soil. Get an official investigation started. Bring in people who might know what they were dealing with. But Dalton hesitated. He'd worked in industrial settings long enough to know how these things went. Report something weird, and suddenly you're the problem. Management doesn't like problems. They like steady production and no complications. If he went to Bill with a story about aliens and missing time, there was a good chance he'd end up on paid leave pending a psych evaluation. And even if they believed him, even if they took him seriously, what then? The oil company would probably close off the wells, bring in investigators, turn the whole thing into a circus. Dalton's face would end up on the news. He'd become that guy who saw the UFO, and that label would follow him for the rest of his life. He wasn't ready for that. So instead, Dalton drove to Hector's apartment in Pecos, a studio unit in a rundown complex near the highway, and pounded on the door until Hector answered, bleary-eyed and annoyed. "What the hell, man? It's 3 a.m. Why aren't you—" Hector stopped mid-sentence, seeing the look on Dalton's face. "What happened?" "I need you to see something, now." 5 minutes later, they were sitting in Dalton's truck in the apartment parking lot, watching the video on repeat. Hector didn't say anything for the first 3 viewings. On the 4th, he paused it on a frame that showed the lights in mid-rotation. "That's not... that can't be..." Hector trailed off. "It's real," Dalton said. "I was there. I filmed it." "And then what? The video just cuts off?" Dalton told him the rest. The craft descending, the missing time, the melted soil, everything. When he finished, Hector was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, We should tell someone. Who? I don't know. The Air Force? NASA? Somebody who studies this stuff. And say what? Hi, we have a grainy video of some lights, and also I lost half an hour and don't remember what happened? It's proof, Dalton. This is actual proof that something's out there. It's proof of lights in the sky, that's all. Could be drones. Could be some kind of military test. Could be a dozen different things. You don't believe that. No, Dalton admitted. I don't, but try convincing anyone else. Hector watched the video again. What do you think they want? I don't know, but I think they're going to come back, and next time I need to be ready. Ready how? Better camera, backup recording device. Hell, I don't know. Maybe some kind of radiation detector or something, see if these things give off any measurable energy. You're talking about setting up a surveillance operation. I'm talking about getting real evidence, something that can't be dismissed or explained away. Hector rubbed his face, trying to wake up fully. Okay, say we do this. Say we get better equipment, stake out the wells, try to document another encounter. What happens if we succeed? What do we do with that information? Cross that bridge when we come to it. This is insane. Yeah, Dalton laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. Yeah, it really is. The next day, Dalton drove to Midland, the biggest city in the region, and spent $1,000 he didn't really have on a high-end digital camera with night vision capabilities, a portable hard drive for backup, and a handheld EMF detector he ordered online. If he was going to document this, he was going to do it right. He and Hector worked out a system. They'd coordinate their routes so Dalton could set up monitoring equipment at the wells where incidents had occurred, Pump 7 and Pump 12. Hector would keep his radio on and stay within 10 minutes' drive of whichever well Dalton was staking out. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Dalton spent hours sitting in the darkness, camera ready, waiting for lights that never appeared. The EMF detector stayed at baseline levels. The night remained empty except for stars and wind and the eternal chunk of the pumpjacks. He was starting to wonder if the encounters were over, if whatever intelligence had been observing him had moved on to other interests. Maybe he'd just been unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time twice. Maybe it was done with him. Then, on the night of October 23rd, exactly 5 weeks after the second encounter, Dalton was at Pump 7 when the EMF detector started chirping. He grabbed it from the truck's dashboard and checked the reading. The electromagnetic field strength was climbing rapidly. 0.5 millitesla, 1.0, 1.5, way higher than background levels. Dalton's heart rate kicked up. He grabbed the camera, made sure it was recording, and stepped out of the truck. The sky above Pump 7 was empty. But the EMF detector was going crazy now, registering 3.0 milliteslas and climbing. The needle was pegging at the high end of the scale. Then Dalton felt it. That sensation he'd come to recognize, the charged air, the drop in temperature, the smell of ozone. He pointed the camera at the sky and waited. For 30 seconds, nothing. Then, like someone flipping a switch, the lights appeared. Not a ring this time, not a triangle. This time, there were dozens of them. Maybe 100 individual lights spread across the sky in a pattern Dalton couldn't immediately comprehend. They formed a shape that was almost fractal, self-similar at different scales, simultaneously organized and chaotic. And they were moving, not erratically but with purpose, each light following its own trajectory while maintaining the overall pattern. It looked like a flock of birds murmurating. If the birds were glowing orbs, and the flock spanned half the visible sky. Dalton filmed it all, making sure to capture timestamps, making sure the camera was recording to both internal memory and the external drive. Whatever happened to him this time, the footage would survive. The lights began to coalesce, drawing together into a tighter formation. As they converged, Dalton could see what they were building toward. A shape. A structure. The individual lights were outlining something massive, giving it form and definition through their positions. It was a craft, but not like the one he'd seen at Pump 12. This one was larger, more complex. Multiple tiers or levels, with the lights marking edges and corners and structural elements. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a building hovering in the sky, an impossible architecture held aloft by means Dalton couldn't begin to guess at. The humming sound started, louder this time, resonating in Dalton's chest. He could feel his ribs vibrating with it. His watch started beeping. The camera continued recording. The craft hung there, fully formed now, blocking out a significant portion of the sky. Dalton estimated it had to be at least 200 feet long, maybe more. Hard to judge scale when you had no reference points except the scattered wells and the flat horizon. And then something changed in Dalton's perception. He was still standing there, still holding the camera, still physically present in the same location. But suddenly, he could see more than just the craft. He could see information, patterns of light and energy flowing around and through the structure above him, mathematical relationships between the positions of the individual lights, the underlying geometry that held the whole thing together. It was like his brain had suddenly gained the ability to perceive dimensions it normally couldn't access. Like a colorblind person seeing the full spectrum for the first time. The information was overwhelming. Too much to process, too much to hold in his mind at once. Dalton felt a nosebleed starting, warm blood trickling over his lip. And then, clear as a voice but not coming through his ears, he heard words. Why do you observe? Not a question in the traditional sense. More like a concept being projected directly into his consciousness. The meaning of why and observe and you, all wrapped together in a single packet of information. Dalton couldn't speak, but he formed a thought, as clearly as he could. Because I want to understand. There was a pause, then, understanding requires context. You lack context. Then give me context, Dalton thought back. Help me understand. Another pause, longer this time. Dalton had the sense of a conversation happening beyond his perception. Multiple voices discussing, debating. The craft's lights pulsed in complex patterns, almost like data being transmitted. Then, context would alter you. You might wish to remain unchanged. I don't care. I need to know. One more pause. Then the lights began to move again, swirling, reorganizing. The craft's outline shifted, flowed, became something else, something smaller, more compact, more focused. The lights converged into a single point directly above Dalton's head, maybe 30 feet up. The point expanded into a sphere about 10 feet in diameter. The sphere descended smoothly until it hovered right in front of him, close enough to touch. The camera was still recording. Dalton could see himself reflected in the sphere's surface, a distorted, stretched version of his form. To understand, you must experience. To experience, we must share perspective. Do you consent? Dalton thought about his life. The divorce, the isolation, the endless nights in the oil fields. The sense that he'd been going through the motions for years, never quite connecting with anything real. This was real. Whatever it was, whoever was communicating with him, it was more real than anything he'd felt in a long time. I consent, Dalton thought. The sphere pulsed once, bright enough to make Dalton squint. And then everything changed. He was no longer standing on the ground. He was somewhere else. Everywhere else. His consciousness had expanded beyond his body, stretching out to encompass enormous distances and infinitesimal details simultaneously. He could see the Earth from orbit, could see the patterns of light from cities, could track individual cars on highways, could zoom in to see people sleeping in their beds, all at once, all accessible. But he could also see beyond Earth, other planets, other stars, other systems. Not with light, but with something else, some form of perception that didn't rely on electromagnetic radiation. He could sense the shape of space itself, the way mass curved it, the way energy flowed through it. And he could see them, the others, the intelligence behind the lights. They weren't physical in the way humans were physical. They existed as patterns, configurations of energy that maintained coherent identity while flowing through different substrates. Sometimes they were the lights Dalton had seen. Sometimes they were the crafts themselves. Sometimes they dispersed into clouds of individual particles, billions of components acting as one. They'd been here for a long time, before humans, before life on Earth. They existed in the spaces between, in the quantum foam, in the dark matter that permeated everything. They observed, recorded, studied, not with malice or benevolence, but with curiosity. They'd noticed Dalton because he'd noticed them. The first encounter at Pump 7 had been incidental. They'd been there. He'd happened to look up at the right moment. But his reaction had been different from others who'd glimpsed them. He'd wanted to understand, not just to see. And that desire had made him visible to them in a way most humans weren't. The missing time wasn't missing. It was compressed, packed into his neurons in a format his normal consciousness couldn't access. The experiences were there, waiting to be unpacked. But doing so would take years of his subjective time, even though only minutes had passed objectively. They showed him other things. Other times they'd made contact with humans, ancient observers who'd built monuments aligned with their appearances, medieval scholars who'd documented lights in the sky, modern witnesses who'd been dismissed as crazy or drunk. They showed him the scope of their observations, the vast data they'd collected on this planet and thousands of others. Every ecosystem, every species, every tiny spark of life cataloged and studied. And they showed him why. The universe was dying. Not quickly. It would take trillions upon trillions of years. But entropy always won in the end. Stars would burn out, black holes would evaporate, and eventually even space itself would decay into nothing. But information could survive. Patterns could be preserved. If you could encode experience into the substrate of reality itself, into the quantum vacuum, then something of what had existed could persist beyond the heat death. They were archivists, librarians on a cosmic scale, recording everything, preserving it against the ultimate darkness. And humans, chaotic, creative, destructive, emotional humans, were part of that record. A small part in the grand scheme, but a part nonetheless. Dalton understood now. The lights weren't invaders or saviors or gods. They were witnesses. They bore testimony to existence itself. And by observing them, by insisting on understanding, Dalton had become something more than just data in their archive. He'd become a fellow observer, someone who saw and recorded and tried to make sense of it all. The perspective collapsed. Dalton's consciousness snapped back into his body like a rubber band. He gasped, stumbling, would have fallen if the sphere hadn't caught him, a surface that felt like warm silk supporting his weight until he could stand on his own. The camera was still recording. The watch was still beeping. But Dalton had changed. He could feel it in every cell, every thought. Information was still unpacking in his mind, terabytes of experience compressed into the neural firing patterns of his brain. It would take time to process, maybe his whole life. But he'd have it, the understanding he'd asked for. The sphere rose back up into the sky. The lights began to disperse, each point moving off in its own direction until the sky was clear again. Dalton stood there in the cold desert night, blood still dried on his upper lip, camera dangling from his hand. When he checked the recording later, it would show the entire encounter. 12 minutes and 43 seconds of footage showing the lights, the craft, the sphere. Proof that would satisfy no one, because people only believe what they're ready to believe. But Dalton had proof of a different kind now, internal evidence that couldn't be taken away or dismissed. He knew. Dalton Ridgway kept working in the oil fields for another 2 years. He never saw the lights again, though he looked for them every night. Hector eventually got his garage in Eagle Pass and moved back home. They stayed in touch, occasional texts and phone calls, but they never talked about what had happened. What could they say that would capture it? The footage Dalton had recorded sat on a hard drive in his trailer. He'd watched it a few times, always hoping to see something new, some detail he'd missed. But it was just lights, just movements. The real content, the download of information, the shared perspective, that didn't show up on video. The information continued to unpack in Dalton's mind. Slowly, gradually, like a flower blooming over the course of years. He'd be working on a pump and suddenly understand something about thermodynamics that wasn't in any textbook. Or he'd look at the night sky and perceive patterns in the distribution of stars that suggested underlying structure. It should have driven him crazy. Maybe it did, a little. But mostly, it just made him curious. More awake, more present. 2 years after the last encounter, Dalton quit his job and enrolled in community college. Physics first, then cosmology. He was older than the other students and his math skills needed work, but the information unpacking in his brain gave him intuitions that compensated. His professors thought he was gifted. They didn't know the half of it. Eventually, he got a degree, then another, then a doctorate. Dr. Dalton Ridgway, astrophysicist, specializing in anomalous observations and unexplained phenomena. He never talked publicly about his experiences in West Texas, but he built a career studying the edges, the places where accepted science broke down and something new peeked through. He published papers on electromagnetic anomalies in remote areas, on time dilation effects at ground level, on geometric patterns in atmospheric plasmas, dry, technical papers that hinted at the truth without ever stating it outright. And every few years, he'd get an email or a letter from someone who'd seen something. Lights in the sky. Missing time. Strange certainties that couldn't be explained. Dalton always wrote back. He'd listen to their stories, validate their experiences, and sometimes, when he thought they were ready, he'd share a little of what he knew. Because the observers were still out there. Still watching, still recording. And some humans, not many, but some, were starting to look back, starting to see, starting to understand. And that, Dalton thought, was a beautiful thing. The thing about driving a supply truck through West Texas at night is that you learn to trust your eyes. You have to. Out here, there's no streetlights, no reflectors, barely any painted lines on half the roads. Just your headlights cutting through darkness and whatever your instincts tell you about where the road ends and the desert begins. Marissa Tolan had been making supply runs for Apex Oilfield Services for 3 years, and she'd learned to trust her eyes. So, when she saw 3 lights blinking on and off in perfect synchronization about a quarter mile ahead, she knew immediately that something was wrong. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday in November. Marissa knew the exact time because she'd just glanced at the dashboard clock, wondering if she'd make it back to the yard before her shift ended at 6. She was driving a Ford F-550 loaded with drill bits, chemical additives, and replacement parts for a rig site 40 miles south of Pecos. The road, if you could call it a road, was more of a maintained track. Grated calichy that turned your kidneys to jelly if you went faster than 30 miles an hour. The radio was playing classic country. Merle Haggard singing about Mama Tried, which Marissa had heard approximately 10,000 times but never got tired of. The heater was blasting because the temperature outside had dropped into the low 40s. And Marissa was thinking about her daughter's upcoming birthday, trying to decide between throwing a party or just doing something small with family. Then she saw the lights, 3 of them, arranged in a perfect horizontal line, maybe 15 feet off the ground. White, bright white, like LED floodlights. They blinked on for exactly 1 second, then off for exactly 1 second. On, off, all 3 in perfect unison. Marissa's first thought was that someone had set up work lights at one of the well sites. But that didn't make sense. The sites all had their own lighting, and nobody worked at 3 in the morning unless there was an emergency. And even then, the lights wouldn't be arranged in a perfect line like that. Her second thought was that it was some kind of vehicle, maybe a wide-load transport with warning lights. But again, wrong configuration. And no vehicle would be sitting still in the middle of nowhere with its lights blinking. Marissa eased off the gas, slowing from 30 to 20. The lights continued their steady rhythm. On, off, on, off. She was maybe 200 yards away now, close enough to see that there was nothing supporting the lights. No towers, no poles, no vehicle underneath them. Just 3 points of white light hanging in the air. "What the hell?" Marissa muttered. She reached for her radio, not the truck's radio, but the handheld CB unit she kept on the passenger seat for communicating with other drivers. Clicked the transmit button. "This is Tolan. Anybody on Channel 9? Over." Static hiss for a few seconds. Then a male voice, scratchy but clear. "Tolan, this is Barlow. Go ahead." Cliff Barlow. Another supply driver, been doing this job even longer than Marissa. Good guy. Reliable. If anyone would believe what she was seeing, it'd be Cliff. "Cliff, I'm on the access road heading south from the Permian site. You anywhere near me? Over." "About 10 miles north of you, I think. What's up? Over." "I'm seeing something weird. Lights, 3 of them, blinking on and off. You see anything unusual up your way? Over." Pause. Longer than necessary for thinking about the question. Then, negative. "Sky's clear, nothing unusual. What kind of lights? Over." Marissa was 100 yards away now. The lights continued their metronomic blinking. On, off, on, off. "I don't know. White lights. Really bright. Just hanging in the air. No visible support. They're right over the road. I'm going to have to drive under them. Over." "You sure they're not just work lights from one of the sites?" Over. "I'm sure. Cliff, they're not normal. I don't like this. Over." "You want me to head your direction? I can turn around, be there in 15 minutes. Over." Marissa thought about it. The smart thing would be to say yes, wait for backup, not approach whatever this was alone. But she had a schedule to keep, and Cliff had his own deliveries to make. And really, what was going to happen? They were just lights. "No, it's okay. I'll go past them, see what I can see. I'll keep the radio on. Over." "Copy that. Be careful. Over." Marissa set the CB back on the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. 50 yards now. The lights were directly ahead, right over the center of the road, still blinking with that precise, mechanical rhythm. She could see them more clearly now. Each light was roughly circular, maybe a foot in diameter. The white was pure, almost blue-white, like an arc welder. They cast very little illumination on the ground below them, just enough to faintly light the Kalish road. No beams, no visible light source, just 3 floating circles of intense brightness. 30 yards. Marissa's truck had a dash cam, standard equipment for all Apex vehicles. The company had installed them 2 years ago after a string of accidents and insurance claims. Marissa was suddenly very glad it was there. Whatever these lights were, they'd be recorded. Proof that she wasn't imagining things. 20 yards. The lights were directly overhead now, or would be in another few seconds. Marissa kept her speed steady at 20 miles per hour. Her hands were sweating on the steering wheel. The country music on the radio seemed too loud suddenly, Merle's voice intrusive. 10 yards. The lights blinked off. 1 second of darkness. Then, everything happened at once. The lights blinked on, but now they were impossibly bright. So intense that Marissa's eyes watered and she squinted involuntarily. The truck's cabin flooded with that blue-white radiance. Every shadow disappeared. It was like being inside a camera flash that lasted for... Marissa blinked. Just a normal, reflexive blink. Eyes closed for a fraction of a second, then open again. But when her eyes opened, the lights were gone. Completely gone. The road ahead was dark. The radio was playing a different song. Travis Tritt had, not Merle Haggard. And the dashboard clock read 2:51 a.m. Marissa's foot hit the brake instinctively. The truck lurched to a stop, engine idling. She sat there, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. The lights had been there, right there. She'd been about to drive under them. She'd blinked, just a normal blink, and they were gone. And the radio had changed songs. And the clock... Wait. The clock had said 2:47 when she'd first seen the lights. Now it said 2:51. 4 minutes had passed. 4 minutes that felt like 1 second. 1 blink. "No," Marissa said out loud. "No, that's not right." She grabbed the CB radio with shaking hands. Cliff, you there? Over." Immediate response. "Yeah, I'm here. What happened?" "I lost you for a few seconds. Over." "What do you mean you lost me? Over." "Your transmission just cut out. I heard 'be there in 15 minutes, and then nothing but static for maybe 4 or 5 seconds. Then it cleared up. What's going on? Over." 4 or 5 seconds of static. 4 minutes on the clock. 1 blink that felt instantaneous. Marissa's mind was racing. "Cliff, what time do you have? Over." 2:51. Why? Over." Same as her clock. So time hadn't stopped or skipped. 4 minutes had actually passed, but she couldn't remember them. They were just gone. Compressed into that single blink. "I'm okay," Marissa said, not sure if she was lying or not. "The lights are gone. I'm fine. Continuing to the site. Over and out." She set the CB down before Cliff could respond. She needed to think. Needed to not have anyone asking her questions until she'd figured out what to ask herself. Marissa put the truck back in gear and continued down the road. Her eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, checking behind her. But there was nothing there. Just darkness and the red glow of her taillights. 4 missing minutes. The thing was, Marissa didn't feel like anything had happened to her. She wasn't hurt, wasn't dizzy, didn't feel drugged or disoriented beyond the normal confusion of losing time. Her clothes were the same. Nothing in the truck had moved. The load in the back was still secured properly. It was like those 4 minutes had simply been edited out of her experience. One moment she was approaching the lights, the next moment she was past them. No transition, no gap in consciousness, just a skip in the recording of her life. The comparison to a recording made her think of the dash cam. Of course, the dash cam would have recorded everything. Whatever happened during those 4 minutes, it would be on video. Marissa desperately wanted to pull over and check the footage right then. But she was still miles from the delivery site, and she had a schedule to keep. The camera's memory card would store several days' worth of footage. It could wait. She drove on, trying to focus on the road, trying not to think about those 3 lights blinking in perfect synchronization, trying not to think about what might have happened during 4 minutes she couldn't remember. Marissa made her delivery, logged the time, got the signature from the night foreman at the rig site. Everything normal. Everything routine. The foreman didn't comment on her looking shaken or nervous, probably because he couldn't see much in the darkness and wasn't paying that much attention anyway. Just another supply run, just another truckload of equipment. She drove back to the apex yard as the eastern sky was starting to show the first hints of gray. Dawn still an hour away, but that pre-dawn glow that promised the night would end eventually. The yard was mostly empty. A few other trucks parked in their designated spots, drivers either out on runs or already gone home for the day. The office was lit up, and Marissa could see Sheila, the night dispatcher, through the window, working on paperwork. Marissa parked her truck, filled out the daily log, and sat there for a moment with the engine off. The dash cam was mounted on the windshield, a small black rectangle with a camera lens and a memory card slot. Apex had gone with a good brand. Continuous recording, GPS tracking, night vision capability. Everything that happened on the road would be captured in high definition. She popped the memory card out of the camera and plugged it into her phone using an adapter she kept in the glove box. The phone had an app for reviewing footage, scrubbing through hours of driving to find specific moments. Marissa found the timestamp. 2:45 a.m. Started playback. The footage showed exactly what she remembered. The road stretching ahead, illuminated by the truck's headlights. The dashboard visible at the bottom of the frame. And then, at 2:47:18, the 3 lights appearing in the distance. They looked even stranger on video than they had in person. 3 perfect circles of white light, arranged in a horizontal line, blinking with mechanical precision. The camera's auto exposure struggled with the brightness, causing the rest of the frame to darken as it compensated. Marissa watched herself approach the lights. On the video, she could hear the radio, Merle haggard, just like she remembered. She could hear the engine noise, the rattling of tools in the truck bed. 2:47:42. She picked up the CB radio. Her voice, tinny through the phone's speaker. "This is Tolan. Anybody on Channel 9? Over?" The conversation with Cliff played out exactly as she remembered it. His voice coming through, asking what was up. Her describing the lights. 2:48:55. The lights were much closer now, maybe 30 yards ahead. Still blinking. On, off, on, off. 2:49:10. 20 yards. 2:49:20. 10 yards. The lights blinked off. 1 second of normal darkness. Then, the screen went white. Pure white. The camera's auto exposure maxed out, unable to handle the intensity of the light. The audio distorted, a crackling noise drowning out everything else. Marissa leaned closer to her phone, watching intently. The white lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then the image returned to normal. The road ahead, dark, no lights. Travis Tritt on the radio. But here's what made Marissa's skin crawl. The timestamp jumped. 2:49:23, 2:49:24, 2:49:25, then 2:49:29. No to 49:26, no to 2:49:27, no 2:49:28. The time code skipped 4 seconds. And the audio did something even stranger. For those missing 4 seconds, there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. No engine noise, no radio, no rattling tools, just dead air, like the microphone had stopped working. Then, at 2:49:29, sound returned, but not where it had left off. Merle Haggard was gone. Travis Tritt was playing a song that was already halfway through. Marissa replayed that section 5 times, trying to find any evidence of tampering or glitching. But the video file was intact. No corruption, no missing data. Just a clean skip from 25 to 29. 4 seconds on the recording. 4 minutes on the clock. One blink that subjectively took no time at all. The math didn't add up. It couldn't add up. But the evidence was right there on video. Marissa was so absorbed in the footage that she didn't notice Cliff Barlow walking up to her truck until he knocked on the window. She jumped, nearly dropping her phone. Cliff stepped back, hands raised apologetically. Marissa rolled down the window. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you," Cliff said. He was in his late 50s, weathered and thin, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too many West Texas sunrises. "Saw your truck pull in, wanted to check if you were okay. You sounded pretty rattled on the radio earlier." "I'm fine," Marissa said automatically. Then, "No, actually, I'm not fine. Cliff, I need you to look at something." She unplugged her phone from the card reader and handed it to him through the window. The footage queued up to the moment of the lights. "Watch this. Tell me what you see." Cliff took the phone and watched the playback. His expression didn't change much. He was the kind of guy who'd learned not to react to things without thinking them through first. When the white flash came and went, his eyebrows rose slightly. "Run it back," he said. "The timestamp part." Marissa leaned over and helped him scrub backward, then play forward again slowly. They watched the time code together. Chapter 23, 24, 25, 29. "Huh," Cliff said. He played it again, then once more. Finally, he handed the phone back. "That's not normal." "No kidding. Camera malfunction?" "That's what I thought at first, but look." Marissa showed him the rest of the file, before and after the incident. The time code ran normally everywhere else, continuous unbroken seconds ticking by. No other skips or glitches. Cliff scratched his beard thoughtfully. "How much time did you lose? Subjectively, I mean." 4 minutes. Clock in the truck said 2:47 when I saw the lights, 2:51 when they disappeared. But it felt like a blink. Yeah, just a normal blink. And when I opened my eyes, it was over. They were both quiet for a moment. Cliff looked out at the lightning sky, then back at Marissa. "I lost your radio signal for about 4 seconds. During that same period, probably." "Yeah." "So we've got 4 seconds of recording time, 4 seconds of radio dropout, and 4 minutes of clock time. All for one subjective blink." Marissa nodded. "I know it doesn't make sense." "Actually," Cliff said slowly, "it makes a kind of sense. Just not a kind I like." "What do you mean?" "Time dilation. If you experienced some kind of extreme acceleration or gravitational field, time would pass differently for you than for the rest of us. 4 minutes for the world, 4 seconds for you. That's Einstein, right? Relativity? More or less. I'm no physicist, but I watch a lot of PBS." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, the kind of acceleration or gravity needed to cause that much dilation would kill you instantly. And it sure as hell wouldn't happen on a back road in West Texas." "Then what did happen?" Cliff shrugged. "No idea, but I know someone who might be interested in this footage." "Who?" "You know Gary Lindemann? Works for one of the service companies out of Midland. Used to be an Air Force radar tech before he got into oil and gas. He's always talking about weird stuff he's seen on radar. Anomalies, unexplained signals. I can give him a call if you want." Marissa thought about it. Part of her wanted to keep this private, not let word get out that she was seeing strange lights and losing time. Once you got a reputation for that kind of thing in the oil patch, it stuck with you. But another part of her needed answers. Needed to know that she wasn't losing her mind. "Yeah," she said. "Call him." Gary Lindemann turned out to be a big guy, probably 6'3" and 300 pounds, with a shaved head and thick-framed glasses that made him look like a cross between a bouncer and a computer programmer. He met Marissa and Cliff at a truck stop diner outside of Pecos 2 days later, ordered a chicken fried steak that could have fed a family of 4, and listened to their story without interrupting. When they finished, he pulled out a tablet and asked to see the footage. Marissa transferred the file via Bluetooth and watched Gary scrub through it, his expression neutral. After the third viewing, Gary set the tablet down and leaned back in the booth. "Okay, I believe you, which is probably not what you expected me to say." "I expected you to tell me I'm crazy," Marissa admitted. "Oh, you might be crazy. But if you are, then so are a lot of other people." Gary pulled up something on his tablet and showed them. It was a map of West Texas and southeastern New Mexico, covered with small colored dots. Each of these dots represents a reported anomaly. Radar contacts that shouldn't be there, visual sightings of lights, equipment malfunctions with no explanation, time anomalies. Marissa stared at the map. There had to be at least 50 dots, probably more. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I've been collecting reports for 3 years, mostly from people in the industry, truck drivers, rig workers, pipeline inspectors, people who spend a lot of time out in remote areas at night." He zoomed in on a section of the map. "And look where your encounter happened." One of the dots was right on the access road where Marissa had seen the lights. But it wasn't alone. There were 3 other dots within a 5-mile radius. "Other people have seen things there?" Cliff asked. "Other people have seen things all over the Permian Basin. But yeah, that particular stretch of road has more reports than most. I've got testimonies about orbs, about geometric light formations, about trucks stalling for no reason." Gary tapped the sheet. "And 2 other reports of missing time. One guy lost an hour, another lost 6 minutes." Marissa felt a chill run down her spine. "Why isn't this bigger news? Why isn't anyone investigating?" "Because nobody wants to be the person who reports UFOs," Gary said bluntly. "Say that word and people stop taking you seriously. Companies don't want the publicity. Workers don't want to seem unreliable, so everyone keeps quiet and the incidents just keep happening." "Do you have any idea what's causing them?" Cliff asked. Gary shrugged. "Theories, sure. None that hold up to scrutiny. Could be atmospheric phenomena. Lots of weird shit happens in desert air. Could be military testing. We've got bases and restricted areas all over New Mexico and West Texas. Could be electromagnetic anomalies from all the drilling and fracking disturbing underground formations. Or it could be something else," Marissa said quietly. "Or it could be something else," Gary agreed. "The thing is, without more data, we're just guessing. What we need is documentation. Multiple cameras, multiple angles, scientific measurements, GPS logs, electromagnetic field readings, radiation levels." "You want us to go back?" Marissa said. "I want to know what's really going on. And the only way to do that is to be there when it happens again. If it happens again." Cliff and Marissa exchanged a glance. Marissa could see her own uncertainty reflected in his face. Going back to that road, actively looking for the lights, inviting another encounter. It seemed like a monumentally bad idea. But Marissa thought about those 4 missing minutes. Thought about the skip in the time code, the silence in the audio, the gap in her memory. If this was happening to other people too, if it was some kind of pattern or phenomenon that could be studied and understood. "What would we need?" she asked Gary. Gary smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask that." 1 week later, Marissa was driving the same route with a truck full of equipment that had nothing to do with oil and gas supplies. The dashcam was still there, of course, but now it had company. A second camera mounted on the rear window facing backward, a high-sensitivity audio recorder, a GPS logger tracking position every second, and a handheld EMF detector sitting on the passenger seat. Cliff was 10 miles behind her in his own truck, similarly equipped. And Gary was monitoring both of them remotely via cellular data connection, watching the GPS trackers on his laptop from his apartment in Midland. The plan was simple. Drive the routes where anomalies had been reported, especially during the hours when they most commonly occurred, between midnight and 4 a.m. Document everything. Hope something happened. Hope nothing happened. Marissa wasn't sure which outcome she preferred. It was 1:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. Marissa had been driving for 3 hours, making loops through the oilfield roads, and hadn't seen anything unusual. The EMF detector sat silent. The GPS logger tracked a boring, consistent path. The cameras recorded mile after mile of empty road. She was starting to think this was a waste of time, starting to convince herself that the lights had been a one-time thing, a freak occurrence that would never repeat. Then her phone buzzed with a text from Gary. Cliff just went silent, radio and data both down. Last position 8 miles NE of you. Marissa's heart rate kicked up. She grabbed the CB radio. Cliff, you there? Over. Static. Pure, unbroken static. She tried his cell phone, straight to voicemail. Gary, I'm not getting anything from Cliff, she said into her phone, which was on speaker. Should I head his direction? Yeah, go. I'll keep trying to reach him. Be careful. Marissa did a 3-point turn on the narrow road and headed northeast, pushing the truck faster than was probably safe on the rough surface. 8 miles. At 40 miles per hour, she'd be there in 12 minutes. The EMF detector started chirping. Marissa glanced at it. The needle was climbing. 0.2 millitesla, 0.5, 0.8, well above background levels and still rising. Gary, I'm getting EMF readings. It's spiking. How high? 1.3 and climbing. Cameras on? They're always on. Good. Keep driving, but watch for anything unusual. Marissa rounded a curve, and there in the distance she saw them. 3 lights. Not in a line this time, arranged in a triangle, hovering over the road where Cliff's truck should be. And beneath them, barely visible in the darkness, Cliff's truck. Stopped, motionless. Gary, I see lights, 3 of them, triangle formation. Cliff's truck is stopped right under them. Can you see Cliff? No, too far away still. Marissa was maybe half a mile out. The lights weren't blinking this time. Just hovering there, steady. That same blue-white color she remembered. The EMF detector was screaming now. 2.5 millitesla, 3.0, maxed out at 3.5. EMF is off the charts. Gary, I don't like this. Can you get to Cliff without driving under the lights? Marissa studied the road. It curved away to the left about 200 yards ahead. If she stopped there, she might be able to see Cliff's truck from an angle, not directly beneath the lights. Maybe. I'm going to try. She slowed as she approached, pulling off to the side of the road while still a good distance from the lights. Put the truck in park, left it running, grabbed a flashlight from the glove box. I'm on foot, going to see if I can reach Cliff. Marissa, I really think you should... But Marissa had already ended the call and pocketed her phone. She needed both hands free, and she didn't want Gary telling her this was a bad idea. She already knew it was a bad idea. The desert night was cold and perfectly still. No wind, no insect sounds, just silence and the distant idle of her truck's engine. Marissa walked along the edge of the road, flashlight off. letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. The 3 lights ahead provided enough illumination to see by once she got closer. Cliff's truck was maybe 100 yards ahead now. She could see it clearly in the glow from above. The driver's door was open, but she couldn't see Cliff. "Cliff!" she called out. Not loud. Somehow it seemed wrong to be loud under those lights. No response. She got closer. 75 yards. 50. The lights were about 30 feet above the truck, arranged in a perfect equilateral triangle with each light at a vertex. Each one was maybe 2 feet in diameter. They cast an almost daylight-bright glow on the area below. And now Marissa could see Cliff. He was standing about 20 feet from his truck, looking up at the lights. Not moving, not reacting to her approach, just standing there, face tilted up, absolutely motionless. "Cliff!" Louder this time. No response. He didn't even turn his head. Marissa was close enough now to see his expression. His face was slack, eyes wide open, pupils dilated. He looked like he was in some kind of trance. She started to move toward him, then stopped. Some instinct told her not to get closer, not to enter that circle of light beneath the triangle. "Cliff, can you hear me?" Nothing. Marissa looked up at the lights. They were steady, unchanging. No blinking, no pulsing. Just 3 points of intense radiance forming a geometric shape above her colleague. Then, without warning, Cliff moved, not a normal movement. His head snapped forward, going from looking up to looking straight ahead, like a puppet whose strings had been suddenly cut. His posture changed, going from rigid to relaxed. He blinked several times rapidly. "Cliff?" Marissa called. He turned toward her and relief flooded through Marissa when she saw recognition in his eyes. "Marissa? What?" He looked around, confused, looked up at the lights, then back at her. "What the hell is going on?" "You don't remember?" "Remember what? I was driving, and then—" He trailed off, frowning. "I don't know. I was driving, and now I'm standing here. Where's my truck?" "Right there." Marissa pointed. Cliff's truck was no more than 20 feet from where he stood. He looked at it like he'd never seen it before. "How did I—" "Come on," Marissa said. "Get out of there. Walk toward me, away from those lights." Cliff nodded and started moving. The moment he stepped out from underneath the triangle of lights, they vanished. Not fading, not dimming. 1 second they were there, the next they were gone. Instant transition to darkness. Marissa's flashlight beam found Cliff's face. He looked disoriented, scared. What the hell were those things? "I don't know. Come on, let's get to the trucks. We need to check the recordings." They walked back together. Marissa's truck's engine was still running. The EMF detector had returned to background levels. Whatever field or radiation those lights had been putting out, it was gone now. Cliff climbed into the passenger seat of Marissa's truck while she got behind the wheel. She pulled out her phone and called Gary. "Jesus Christ, Marissa, what happened? You just went radio silent for—" He paused. 17 minutes. 17? Marissa checked the clock. 2:08 a.m. She'd parked her truck at— She tried to remember. Around 1:50, she thought. That would be 18 minutes. "Are you sure?" "Your GPS tracker stopped updating at 1:51. Just came back online now. What happened out there?" Marissa told him, with Cliff filling in gaps from his perspective. Which wasn't much. Cliff remembered driving, seeing lights ahead, stopping his truck to investigate. And then nothing until Marissa called his name. "I need to see the footage," Gary said. "Both trucks. Can you get to somewhere with better cell service and upload it?" "Yeah, we'll head to the truck stop off Highway 20. Give us 40 minutes. I'll be waiting." The truck stop had decent Wi-Fi. Marissa and Cliff sat in a booth, laptops open, uploading gigabytes of video while Gary watched remotely. Cliff's footage showed him approaching the lights, which were already hovering over the road when he came around a curve. He slowed, stopped, got out of the truck. The exterior camera showed him walking toward the lights, and then the footage jumped. One frame, Cliff was 20 feet from the truck, walking forward. The next frame, he was standing still, head tilted up, but the time code skipped forward. Not 4 seconds this time. 11 minutes and 43 seconds. During that missing time, the lights remained steady. Cliff remained motionless. Nothing moved except occasional dust blowing across the road. Then Marissa's voice, faint on the audio. "Cliff, can you hear me?" Cliff's head snapped forward. He blinked, looked around. Everything after that played normally. Marissa's footage showed her approaching in her truck, the lights visible ahead. She parked, got out. The camera angle didn't capture her walking toward Cliff. She'd moved out of frame. But the audio picked up her voice calling his name. And her footage showed the same temporal skip, from 1:51:33 to 2:03:16. 11 minutes and 43 seconds. Gary was silent for a long moment after reviewing both sets of footage. Finally, he said, "Okay, this is bigger than I thought." "What do you mean?" Marissa asked. "The first time, you lost 4 minutes subjectively, but the recording showed a 4-second skip. This time, you lost 11 minutes subjectively, and the recording shows an 11-minute skip. That's a different pattern." "How?" "I don't know yet. But look at the GPS logs." Gary shared his screen. Both trucks' GPS trackers showed steady position updates, then gaps, then resumption. Marissa's gap was exactly 17 minutes. Cliff's was exactly 11 minutes. "Why different durations?" Cliff asked. "You tell me. You were the one standing under the lights." Cliff shook his head. "I don't remember anything. It's just blank." "What about dreams? Sometimes memories surface later as dreams." "No, nothing, just a complete gap." Marissa thought about her own experience, that single blink that had erased 4 minutes. "It's like the time doesn't exist. Not for us. For everyone watching, time passes normally. But for us, inside whatever those lights are doing, time just stops, or skips, or something. Except the recording time matches the GPS time," Gary pointed out. "So the cameras and loggers experience the gap. It's only your subjective experience that gets compressed." "Consciousness," Cliff said suddenly. They both looked at him. "Our consciousness gets compressed, or removed, or put on pause. The physical world keeps going. Cameras keep recording. GPS keeps tracking. Our bodies keep standing there. But our minds skip forward." Marissa felt a chill. "That's terrifying." "Yeah." They sat in silence for a while, watching the footage loop on Gary's shared screen, the lights hovering. Cliff standing motionless. Everything frozen except the clock ticking forward, counting seconds that Cliff didn't experience. "I want to know what happened during those minutes," Cliff said finally. "I want to know where my mind was, what I was doing, what was happening to me." "Hypnosis might help," Gary suggested. "Sometimes memory recovery techniques can access things you can't consciously recall." "Or maybe we need to go back," Marissa said. Both men looked at her. "Maybe we need to experience it again, but this time prepared, with more equipment, more cameras, maybe even medical monitoring, heart rate, brain activity, that kind of thing." "That's insane," Cliff said. "You want to deliberately put yourself under those lights?" "I want answers, don't you?" Cliff didn't respond immediately, but Marissa could see in his face that yes, he did want answers. Badly enough to consider doing something crazy. Gary cleared his throat. If you're serious about this, I know some people. Researchers. Not mainstream. They'd never get funding for this. But legitimate scientists who are interested in anomalous phenomena. They might be willing to help. Help how? Marissa asked. Equipment, expertise, maybe even participation. Let me make some calls. 2 weeks later, Marissa found herself back on that same stretch of road with a truck that looked more like a mobile laboratory than an oilfield supply vehicle. Dr. Sarah Kaseman, a neurologist from a university in Albuquerque, had set up EEG electrodes on Marissa's scalp. Dr. James Okoye, a physicist specializing in electromagnetic phenomena, had deployed a ring of sensors around the location where the lights had previously appeared. And Gary was coordinating everything, managing the data feeds from 8 different cameras, 2 GPS trackers, 6 EMF detectors, and various other instruments whose purposes Marissa didn't fully understand. Cliff was there too, similarly wired with electrodes, though he'd insisted on staying in his truck rather than being the one who stood under the lights. Once was enough, he'd said, and nobody argued with him. The setup had taken hours. Now it was 1:47 a.m. and they were waiting. Dr. Kaseman sat in the back of Marissa's truck, monitoring the EEG readouts on a laptop. Dr. Okoye was 50 yards away watching his sensors. Gary was parked another 100 yards out, coordinating via radio. This might be a waste of time, Marissa said. There's no guarantee the lights will show up. All scientific observation involves waiting, Dr. Kaseman replied. She was in her 40s with short dark hair and an intensity that suggested she took her work very seriously. Sometimes for years. We've been here for 3 hours. That's nothing. What exactly are you hoping to see on the EEG? Any changes in your brain activity when the phenomenon occurs, particularly in the temporal lobe, which is associated with memory formation, and the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in conscious awareness. If you experience another time skip, I want to know what your brain is doing during it. And if the skip happens, you'll experience it too, won't you? Lose that time? Possibly, but the equipment will keep recording. That's why we have multiple redundant systems. Whatever happens, we'll have data. Marissa nodded and went back to watching the road ahead. The night was clear and cold, stars overhead like somebody had spilled diamonds across black velvet, beautiful and indifferent. At 2:14 a.m., Dr. Okoye's voice came over the radio. I'm getting readings, electromagnetic field strength increasing. Background levels were 0.2 millitesla, now at 0.7 and climbing. Marissa felt her heart rate pick up. The EEG electrodes on her scalp suddenly felt very present. Visual contact? Gary asked over the radio. Marissa scanned the sky and the road ahead. Not yet, nothing visible. 1.3 millitesla, Dr. Okoye reported. Rate of increase is accelerating. There, Cliff's voice. Straight ahead, about half a mile out. Marissa saw them. 3 lights again, but not in a triangle this time. Arranged vertically, one above the other, like a traffic light, hovering over the road. I have visual confirmation, Marissa said into her radio. 3 lights, vertical configuration. I see them too, Dr. Kaseman said from behind her. James, you getting anything? EMF is at 2.1 and still climbing. I'm also detecting, wait, a pause. I'm detecting gravitational anomalies. The sensors are showing local variations in gravitational field strength. That's not possible, Dr. Kaseman said. Telling me what the readings say. Small variations, but definitely there. Gravity is fluctuating. The lights were closer now, maybe a quarter mile. They weren't moving toward Marissa's truck, but they also weren't receding. Just hanging there, vertical alignment, steady and unblinking. "Marissa, your brain activity just spiked," Dr. Caseman said. "Theta waves in the temporal region. That's unusual. You shouldn't be showing that level of theta activity while awake." "What does it mean?" "I don't know yet. Could indicate a hypnotic or trance state, or possibly memory consolidation. But you're not asleep, so the lights moved. Not floating or drifting. They relocated. One instant they were a quarter-mile away. The next they were 50 yards away. No transition, no movement between. Just a jump from one position to another." "Did you see that?" Cliff's voice tight with tension. "Yeah," Marissa said. The lights jumped again. Now they were directly overhead. The 3 points forming a vertical line above Marissa's truck. And everything changed. The sound vanished first. Not fading, not muffling. Just gone. Complete silence. Marissa could see Dr. Caseman's mouth moving behind her, but no sound came out. Then the world became strange. Marissa was still in her truck, still sitting in the driver's seat, still seeing the road ahead illuminated by her headlights. But she was also somewhere else, simultaneously. 2 places at once, 2 states of being overlapping. The somewhere else was hard to describe. It wasn't a physical location, more like a space between spaces, a fold in reality where normal rules didn't apply, and she wasn't alone there. There were others in that space. She couldn't see them exactly, couldn't hear them. But she was aware of their presence, multiple presences examining her, studying her, curious about her in the same way she might be curious about an insect under a magnifying glass. But not hostile, not threatening. Just interested. One of the presences came closer. Marissa felt it like a pressure in her mind, gentle but insistent. It was asking something, not with words, with concepts, pure meaning transmitted directly. "Why do you seek us?" Marissa tried to form a response, but her thoughts felt sluggish, hard to shape. "To understand, to know what you are. We are what we have always been. Observers, recorders, archivists. From where? From everywhere, from nowhere. From the spaces that are not space." The presence withdrew slightly, and Marissa felt other presences moving in that strange space. She had a sense of enormous activity happening around her, of processes and purposes beyond her comprehension. Then the first presence returned. "You wish to remember. You wish to hold these moments in your awareness. Yes, we can arrange this. But there is a cost. What cost? You will remember. But remembering will change you, make you other than you were. Is this acceptable?" Marissa thought about it, or tried to. Her mind was still sluggish, thoughts forming slowly, but she knew the answer. "Yes, that's acceptable." "Very well." And then something happened. Marissa felt a sensation like cold water being poured through her consciousness. Information flooding in, too much and too fast, overwhelming. She tried to hold on to it, tried to grasp the meanings being transmitted, but it was like trying to hold water in cupped hands. Most of it slipped away, but some remained. Fragments, impressions, a sense of vast distance and time, of purposes that spanned millennia, of observation conducted on a scale that made human concerns seem infinitesimally small. The cold water sensation faded. The presences withdrew. And Marissa was suddenly just in her truck again. Singular, no longer existing in 2 places at once. Sound returned like a thunderclap. Dr. Caseman shouting, "Responding, Marissa, can you hear me?" "I'm here," Marissa said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I'm okay." The lights were gone. The sky above was dark and empty. "Jesus Christ!" Dr. Okoye's voice over the radio. "Did you see that? The gravitational readings just They went completely off scale and then normalized in less than a second. How long? Marissa asked. How long was we under the lights? 23 minutes, Gary said. You went silent at 2:14. Radio dead, GPS dead, everything dead. Just came back online now at 2:37. 23 minutes. But Marissa remembered all of it. Every second. The presence in that between space, the communication, the offer and her acceptance, the flood of information. She remembered. Dr. Caseman, she said. What did the EEG show? I don't know yet. The equipment kept recording, but I need to analyze the data. Your brain activity went completely chaotic during the event. Patterns I've never seen before. Then it normalized. A pause. Marissa, do you remember what happened during those 23 minutes? Yes, Marissa said. I remember all of it. The data from that night filled terabytes of storage. The cameras had recorded everything, though the footage showed the same temporal skips that previous recordings had shown. The GPS loggers showed the gaps. The EMF detectors had captured the field spikes. Dr. Okoye's gravitational sensors showed fluctuations that shouldn't have been possible. And Dr. Caseman's EEG recordings showed brain activity patterns that made no sense according to conventional neuroscience. You were essentially in multiple brain states simultaneously, she explained to Marissa a week later. Alpha, theta, and gamma waves all at the same levels at the same time. That shouldn't be possible. It's like your brain was awake, asleep, and in deep meditation all at once. Can you explain what happened to me? Marissa asked. No, I can describe what the equipment measured, but I can't explain it. Not with current scientific understanding. Marissa had spent the week trying to process everything she'd experienced. The memories were intact. She could recall the presence in that between space, the communication, the information that had been transmitted. But making sense of it, putting it into words, translating alien concepts into human language, that was proving difficult. She'd written things down, tried to explain to Cliff and Gary and the researchers what she'd learned, but it always felt inadequate, like trying to describe color to someone who'd been blind from birth. What she did understand, the lights weren't vehicles. They were more like probes, extensions of a larger intelligence that existed partially outside normal space-time. The intelligence observed reality from multiple perspectives simultaneously, experiencing time non-linearly. When humans encountered the lights, they were essentially making contact with a fragment of that intelligence. And the intelligence was curious about humans because humans were also observers, also trying to make sense of the universe. The time skips happened because the contact occurred in that between space where time didn't flow normally. Minutes in normal time compressed to moments of subjective experience, except for those who the intelligence chose to allow to remember. And remembering meant being changed, having your consciousness altered to be able to hold experiences that weren't meant to fit in human neurology. Marissa had been changed. She could feel it. She perceived time differently now. When she looked at a clock, she saw not just the current moment, but the flow of moments, past and future, connected in ways she'd never noticed before. She also saw patterns, in the distribution of stars, in the movement of traffic, in the seemingly random events of daily life. Patterns that suggested underlying order, intention, design. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "What will you do now?" Dr. Caseman asked. "Now that you remember?" Marissa thought about it. "I'll keep driving, keep making my supply runs, keep watching the sky, because they're still out there, still observing, and maybe other people need to know that." "You'll go public?" "Eventually. when I figure out how to explain it without sounding crazy. Marissa smiled. Though, I'm not sure that's possible. She left Dr. Caseman's office and drove back to the oil fields. Back to the roads she knew so well. Back to the night shifts and the solitude and the vast empty spaces of West Texas. But now, when she drove those roads, she watched for the lights. Not with fear, but with understanding. They were witnesses, just like her, recording, observing, trying to make sense of existence. And sometimes, not often, but occasionally, she'd see them. 3 lights blinking, or hovering, or jumping from one location to another, and she'd stop her truck and watch them, and they'd watch her, and there would be a moment of mutual recognition between observer and observed. 2 months after the incident, Marissa was driving past the spot where she'd first seen the lights. It was 2:47 a.m. She noted the time with a kind of bemused recognition. Of course, it was 2:47. These things seemed to happen at consistent times, consistent places, patterns within patterns. 3 lights appeared ahead of her, not blinking this time, just steadily glowing, arranged in her now familiar triangle formation. Marissa slowed her truck but didn't stop. She reached for her CB radio, but before she could key the transmit button, she felt it. That presence in her mind, gentle, curious, familiar now. "You understand," it said. Not a question, a statement. "I'm beginning to," Marissa thought back. "Good, you will help others understand. When they are ready. How will I know when they're ready? You will know. You are changed. You see now as we see." The lights blinked out. Marissa continued driving, and for the first time since this had all started, she felt at peace with the mystery. Because some questions weren't meant to be answered. They were meant to be lived with, held carefully, shared with those who were ready to receive them. Marissa Tolan kept driving trucks through the West Texas oil fields for years after that. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, when the stars were bright and the world was silent, she'd see the lights, and she'd remember, and that was enough. There are sounds in the West Texas desert that become part of the background noise after you've worked the oil fields long enough. The wind howling across flat expanses, coyotes yipping in the distance, the rhythmic thump of active pumpjacks pulling crude from deep underground. These sounds become so familiar they're almost comforting, markers of normalcy in an otherwise isolated existence. But some sounds don't fit. Some sounds make you stop and question whether you're hearing what you think you're hearing. Ryder McLean heard one of those sounds on a Tuesday night in late October, and it would haunt him for months afterward. Ryder was 29 years old, originally from Lubbock, and had been working in the oil fields for 6 years. He'd started as a roughneck on drilling rigs, moved into maintenance and repair work, and for the past year had been employed by Permian Infrastructure Solutions as a site inspector. His job was simple: visit inactive and abandoned well sites, check for leaks or structural issues, document any problems, recommend whether sites should be permanently decommissioned or could potentially be brought back online. It was lonely work. Most of the sites he visited hadn't seen human activity in years, sometimes decades. Rusted equipment, buildings with windows broken by wind-blown rocks, roads so degraded you couldn't tell where they'd originally run. Ghost sites, people called them. Places the oil boom had touched and then abandoned when the wells ran dry or the economics changed. Well, Site 14B was one of those ghost sites. Located about 60 miles northwest of Midland, accessed by a dirt track that wound through mesquite and creosote, it had been active from 1978 to 91 before being shut down. The company that originally operated it had gone bankrupt in the mid-90s. and the site had passed through several ownership changes before ending up in Permian Infrastructure's portfolio of legacy assets. Ryder had visited 14B twice before, both times during daylight hours. Standard inspection. Check the wellhead for leaks, examine the small metal building where equipment had once been housed, look for any environmental damage. Nothing remarkable. Just another dead site slowly being reclaimed by the desert. But on Tuesday, October 23rd, at 11:47 p.m., Ryder got a call from the company's night dispatcher, a guy named Frank, who usually sounded half asleep. Frank sounded very much awake. "Ryder, I need you to do a night run out to Site 14B. We're getting reports of activity." Activity? What kind of activity? Engine sounds. Somebody called it in. Rancher, whose property borders the site, says he's been hearing what sounds like a diesel engine running out there for the past 3 nights. Thinks maybe we've got squatters or thieves stripping equipment. Ryder frowned. Site 14B was so remote that it would be a terrible choice for squatting. No water, no shelter worth mentioning, miles from anywhere. And there was nothing left to steal. Any valuable equipment had been removed years ago. "You sure it's 14B specifically? Could be coming from another site." Rancher was pretty specific. Said it's definitely coming from our location. "Boss wants you to check it out tonight. If there's someone out there, we need to know." Ryder sighed. Night runs to abandoned sites weren't his favorite, but it was part of the job. "All right, I'll head out there. ETA probably around 1 a.m. "Copy that. Radio in when you arrive and again when you leave. And Ryder, be careful. If there are people out there, don't confront them. Just observe and report." "Will do." Ryder grabbed his gear, flashlight, radio, clipboard, the usual inspection kit, and headed out to his truck. The night was cold and clear, temperature already down into the low 50s. The kind of night where the stars were so bright they cast faint shadows. The drive to Site 14B took just over an hour. The last 20 miles on progressively worse roads until he was basically just following tire tracks across open desert. Ryder knew the way, though. He'd been out here enough times. As he got closer, maybe 2 miles out, Ryder rolled down his window to let fresh air in. And that's when he heard it. A sound, faint, distant, but definitely there. A low, rhythmic thrumming. Mechanical, steady. An engine running. Ryder slowed his truck, listening. The sound was coming from ahead of him, from the direction of Site 14B. The rancher had been right. Something was making engine noise out there. But as Ryder got closer, the sound became stranger. It wasn't quite right for a diesel engine. The rhythm was too perfect, too steady. Real engines had variations, tiny inconsistencies in the combustion cycle. This sounded almost synthetic, like a recording of an engine rather than an actual engine. Ryder parked his truck about 100 yards from the main site buildings, killed the engine and lights, sat in darkness for a moment, listening. The sound continued. Thrumming, steady, mechanical, coming from somewhere near the old equipment shed. Ryder grabbed his flashlight and radio and got out of the truck. The cold air hit him immediately, carrying with it the smell of creosote and dust. And underneath that, something else. A faint smell that reminded Ryder of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. He keyed his radio. "Frank, this is Ryder. I'm at Site 14B. Confirming the sound. I can hear what sounds like an engine running. I'm going to investigate. Over." Static for a moment. Then Frank's voice. "Copy that, Ryder. Keep the radio on. Over." Ryder started walking toward the sound. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the familiar structures of Site 14B. The wellhead itself, capped and sealed decades ago. The small equipment shed, maybe 20 feet by 30, metal walls rusted and pockmarked. A few concrete pads where tanks had once stood. Everything covered in wind-blown dust and decades of neglect. The sound was definitely coming from inside the equipment shed. Ryder approached slowly. The shed's door was closed but not locked. The lock had rusted away years ago. He stood outside for a moment, listening. The engine sound was clear now, maybe 15 feet away, just on the other side of that metal wall. A steady thrumming, low frequency, almost hypnotic in its regularity. Ryder pulled the door open. The hinges screamed in protest, metal on metal. The sound inside didn't change, didn't pause, just kept running. He stepped inside, flashlight sweeping across the interior of the shed. Empty. Well, not completely empty. There was still some old equipment in here, pipes, fittings, a few rusted tools. But no engine, no generator, no machinery of any kind that could be producing that sound. And yet the sound was everywhere. Inside the shed, it was almost overwhelming. The walls seemed to vibrate with it. Ryder could feel it in his chest, in his teeth, but there was nothing making the sound. Ryder's skin crawled. He swept his flashlight across every surface looking for speakers, looking for any device that could be producing this sound. Nothing. Just rust and dust and emptiness. He walked deeper into the shed. The concrete floor was cracked, weeds growing through in places. In the far corner there was a concrete pad where a large piece of equipment had once been mounted. Bolt holes still visible, stains from oil long since evaporated. The sound seemed loudest near that corner. Ryder knelt down, placed his hand on the concrete pad. It was vibrating, subtly, but definitely vibrating in time with the engine sound. But there was no engine. He knew the history of this site. The main pump engine had been removed in '92, hauled away for scrap or reuse. Nothing had been here for over 30 years. "This doesn't make sense," Ryder muttered. He pulled out his phone and started recording video. Panned across the empty shed, capturing the sound. The phone's microphone picked it up clearly. A steady mechanical thrumming, loud and consistent. Then, Ryder noticed something else. In the far corner of the shed, the wall looked different. Not structurally different, just off. The rust patterns were different. And was it his imagination, or was that section of wall slightly darker than the rest? He walked over and reached out to touch the wall. Heat. The metal wall was hot. Not burning hot, but noticeably warmer than room temperature. Ryder pulled his hand back, startled. The rest of the shed was cold. It was October, and the metal building had no insulation. But this section of wall, maybe 6 feet wide and 4 feet tall, was radiating heat. Ryder pulled out his infrared thermometer from his inspection kit, pointed it at the normal wall. 53 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly ambient temperature. Pointed it at the hot section. 89 degrees. 36-degree difference. In a section of wall with no heat source behind it, no equipment, nothing. "Frank," Ryder said into his radio, "I need you to send someone else out here, and maybe call Elias Barrett. This is above my pay grade." Elias Barrett arrived at Site 14B at 3:17 a.m., driving a beat-up Dodge Ram that had seen better days. Elias was 56 years old, a company senior site manager with over 30 years in the oil fields. He'd worked drilling rigs, supervised operations, managed entire field offices. If there was a problem in the oil patch, Elias had probably seen it or something like it. But when he stepped into the equipment shed at Site 14B and heard that sound, his expression suggested he'd never encountered anything quite like this. "How long has it been running?" Elias asked. "Since before I got here," Ryder replied. "Over 4 hours now. No variation, no change." Elias walked around the shed, listening, observing. He had a handheld audio recorder with him, and he held it up, capturing the sound from different positions. After a full circuit of the room, he stood in the center and just listened for a solid minute. "It's not an engine," he finally said. "I know. There's no engine here. No, I mean it's not the sound an engine makes. It's close, but it's not quite right. The harmonics are off. A real diesel engine produces a complex sound. Pistons, valves, exhaust, all producing overlapping frequencies. This is simpler, like someone distilled engine noise down to its fundamental frequency." Ryder hadn't thought of it that way, but Elias was right. The sound was too pure, too consistent. "And there's this," Ryder said, leading Elias to the hot section of wall. He handed over the infrared thermometer. Elias took readings, frowning, moved along the wall, mapping out the boundaries of the hot zone. It was roughly rectangular, centered on what used to be the engine mount. "You said the engine was removed in '92? "According to the records, yeah. Sold for scrap." "And there's been no activity here since then? No new equipment installed? Nothing? This site's been dead for 3 decades. Elias ran his hand along the hot section of wall, careful not to leave it there too long. "This heat pattern is consistent with something radiating from inside the wall cavity, or from outside the building, but there's nothing outside. I checked before I came in. Just open desert. So it's inside the wall? Maybe, but these walls are thin metal, single layer, no insulation cavity. There's nowhere for a heat source to hide." Elias pulled out a multi-tool and scraped at the wall surface. The rust came away easily, revealing cleaner metal underneath. Nothing unusual. Just normal steel construction. They stood there for a while, 2 men in a rusty shed in the middle of the desert, listening to an impossible engine sound and touching an impossible heat source. "We need to document this properly," Elias finally said. "Temperature readings at regular intervals, audio recordings with timestamps. If this is some kind of equipment malfunction or environmental phenomenon, we need data to figure it out. And if it's not," Elias looked at Ryder, "then we need data to prove it's not." Over the next 3 nights, Ryder and Elias established a monitoring routine. They set up equipment in and around the shed. Temperature sensors, audio recorders, even a seismometer borrowed from a friend of Elias's who worked in drilling operations. If something was causing vibrations in the ground or the structure, they'd detect it. The sound continued. Every night from roughly 11 p.m. until around 4:30 a.m., the engine sound would start up. Not gradually, just suddenly there, full volume, as if someone had flipped a switch, and at 4:30 it would stop just as abruptly. The hot spot on the wall followed the same pattern. When the sound started, the temperature would begin rising. Within 20 minutes, it would plateau at around 90 degrees and stay there until the sound stopped. Then it would cool back down to ambient temperature over the course of about an hour. The temperature sensors showed something interesting. The heat wasn't radiating from the wall outward into the shed. Instead, it seemed to be concentrated in the wall itself, as if the metal was generating its own heat. The air temperature right next to the wall was only a few degrees warmer than the rest of the shed. The seismometer showed vibrations, but they were strange. Not the kind of vibrations you'd expect from mechanical equipment. Those would be localized, stronger near the source, diminishing with the distance. These vibrations were uniform throughout the building, as if the entire structure was resonating at a specific frequency. On the 4th night, Elias brought someone new to the site. Dr. Nina Kowalski, a geophysicist from a consulting firm in Midland. She specialized in subsurface imaging and had worked on various oilfield projects analyzing underground formations. Dr. Kowalski was in her early 40s, professional and focused. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Show me the anomaly," she said as soon as she arrived. Ryder and Elias led her to the shed. The sound was already running. It was 1:30 a.m., right in the middle of the active period. Dr. Kowalski pulled out her own equipment, much more sophisticated than what Ryder and Elias had been using. A spectrum analyzer to break down the sound frequencies. Professional-grade thermal camera to map the heat distribution. A magnetometer to check for magnetic field anomalies. She worked methodically, taking readings, making notes, moving around the shed with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this kind of field work many times. After an hour, she stepped outside to analyze the data on her laptop. Ryder and Elias joined her. "The sound," Dr. Kowalski said, pulling up a waveform analysis on her screen, "is almost a pure tone. Frequency of 47 hertz, which would be consistent with a diesel engine running at about 2,800 RPM. But a real engine would have harmonics, overtones, irregularities. This is remarkably clean, too clean." "Could it be artificially generated?" Elias asked. "Like a speaker playing a recording?" "Possibly, but I don't see a source. No electromagnetic signature that would indicate powered equipment, and the volume level is consistent throughout the building, which wouldn't happen with a point source like a speaker." "What about the heat?" Ryder asked. Dr. Kowalski pulled up thermal images. The hot spot on the wall showed up bright on the display. "This is unusual. The heat is definitely concentrated in that section of wall, but there's no gradient. In natural heating, you see a temperature gradient from the heat source outward. Hot in the center, cooler at the edges. This is uniformly hot across the entire rectangular section, then drops sharply to ambient temperature at the boundaries. Like someone drew a rectangle and made it hot," Ryder said. "Exactly like that, which is physically problematic. Heat doesn't work that way naturally." "So, what are we looking at?" Elias asked. "What could cause this?" Dr. Kowalski was quiet for a moment, studying her data. "I don't know, but I'd like to do a subsurface scan, see if there's anything under the building that could be relevant." "Like what?" "Old equipment that was buried instead of removed. Underground storage tanks. Could even be a natural cavity or formation that's creating some kind of acoustic effect." "You can do that scan now?" Elias asked. "Not until daylight. The equipment needs visual reference points, but I can come back today, and do a full survey." They agreed to meet back at the site at 9 o'clock a.m. Dr. Kowalski packed up her equipment and drove off, leaving Ryder and Elias alone with the sound that shouldn't exist and the heat that shouldn't be there. "What do you think?" Ryder asked. Elias shook his head. "I've been in this business for 30 years, seen a lot of weird stuff, equipment that fails in ways it shouldn't, strange readings that turn out to be instrument error. Usually there's an explanation, even if it takes a while to find. But I've never seen anything quite like this, and I don't like the way it makes me feel." "What do you mean?" "Standing in that shed, listening to that sound, it makes me uneasy. Not scared exactly. Just wrong. Like I'm experiencing something I'm not supposed to experience." Ryder knew exactly what Elias meant. He'd felt it too. That sense of wrongness, of reality being slightly off-kilter. They stayed until 4:30 a.m. when the sound stopped. The transition was immediate. 1 second the engine noise filled the air, the next second silence. Not even an echo or a fade. Just instant cessation. "Like someone flipped a switch," Ryder said. "Yeah," Elias agreed. "Or like whatever's generating it just stopped existing." They monitored the temperature readings for another hour, watching the hot spot on the wall gradually cool down. By 5:45 a.m., it was back to ambient temperature. No residual heat, no trace that anything unusual had occurred. As dawn started to lighten the eastern sky, Ryder and Elias drove back to town. Neither of them talked much. They were both thinking about what they'd witnessed, trying to fit it into their understanding of how the world worked. The thing was, it didn't fit. No matter how they approached it, the phenomenon at Site 14B violated basic physical principles. Sound without a source, heat without a reason, vibrations with no origin point. Something was happening out there in that abandoned building, something that shouldn't be possible, and neither of them could shake the feeling that it was only going to get stranger. Dr. Kowalski arrived at Site 14B at 9 o'clock a.m. sharp, accompanied by 2 assistants and a white van full of equipment. The subsurface imaging gear was impressive, ground-penetrating radar that could map underground structures down to significant depth. Ryder and Elias watched as the team set up a grid pattern around the equipment shed, placing markers every 5 feet in both directions. Then they began scanning, moving the radar unit systematically across the grid while data accumulated on a laptop in the van. The process took hours. The sun climbed higher, the temperature rising into the low 70s. By early afternoon, Dr. Kowalski had completed the scan and was reviewing the results. "Come look at this," she called to Ryder and Elias. The laptop displayed a 3D rendering of the subsurface structure. The equipment shed showed up as a clear outline on the ground surface. Below it, layers of soil and rock in various densities, color-coded by the software. And underneath the shed, about 15 feet down, something else. "What is that?" Ryder asked, pointing at a geometric shape in the rendering. "That's what I'd like to know," Dr. Kowalski said. "It's showing up as a void, a hollow space, roughly rectangular, approximately 8 feet by 12 feet and about 4 feet tall. The walls are registering as much denser than the surrounding soil, almost like concrete or metal. Could it be an old storage chamber?" Elias suggested. "Maybe they buried something when they decommissioned the site?" "Possibly, but it's not in any of the site records I've seen. And if it were a storage tank or chamber, I'd expect to see access points, pipes, conduits, something connecting it to the surface." "Is there any connection?" Ryder asked. Dr. Kowalski manipulated the display, rotating the 3D image. "Actually, yes. There's a narrow vertical shaft connecting the chamber to the surface, about 6 inches in diameter. It terminates," she zoomed in on the surface data, "right under the equipment shed, right under that hot spot on the wall." Ryder and Elias exchanged looks. "So, something underground is connected to the place where we're detecting heat and vibrations," Elias said. "It appears so, but again, there's nothing in the site records about underground structures. The site was drilled in 1978, operated for 13 years, then capped and abandoned. Standard procedure. No mention of any chambers or subsurface installations." "Could it be natural?" Ryder asked. "A cave or cavity that just happens to be under the building." "The geometry is too regular. Natural cavities are irregular, organic shapes. This is rectangular, with precise dimensions. It's definitely man-made. So, someone built an underground chamber here and didn't document it. Or they did document it, and those documents have been lost or classified." That word, classified, hung in the air for a moment. Site 14B was on public land leased for oil production. There shouldn't be anything classified about it. Unless, "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Ryder asked Elias. "If you're thinking maybe this wasn't always just an oil well site, then yeah." Dr. Kowalski looked between them. "What am I missing?" Elias scratched his beard. "West Texas and eastern New Mexico have a lot of military history. Test ranges, research facilities, stuff that was operational during the Cold War and then got quietly shut down or repurposed. Sometimes those facilities got built into existing infrastructure to hide them in plain sight. You think this oil well site was cover for something else? I think it's possible, especially if there's an undocumented underground chamber that someone went to the trouble of building. Dr. Kowalski looked back at her laptop, studying the subsurface rendering. If that's true, it would explain some of what we're seeing, but it doesn't explain the sound or the heat pattern. Military facilities don't run themselves autonomously for 30 years. No, Elias agreed, they don't. They stood there in the afternoon sunlight looking at the rusted equipment shed, knowing that underneath it was something that shouldn't be there. Something that might be connected to the impossible phenomena they'd been documenting. "We need to see what's down there," Ryder said. "That would require excavation," Dr. Kowalski pointed out. "Permits, safety protocols, and if this is a former military installation, we'd need clearances. How long would that take? Weeks? Maybe months?" "The rancher who reported the sound said it's been happening for at least a few nights," Elias said. "Could be longer, could be this has been going on for weeks or months, and he only just noticed or decided to report it. So, whatever's down there, it's been active for a while," Ryder said. "And might keep being active for a while longer," Dr. Kowalski added, "which gives us time to do this properly. Document everything, get proper authorization, then investigate safely." Ryder wanted to argue, wanted to grab a shovel and start digging right then, but he knew she was right. You didn't just break into underground chambers without knowing what you were getting into. Could be structural hazards, could be environmental contamination, could be any number of dangers. Still, the wait was going to be frustrating. "In the meantime," Dr. Kowalski said, "I'd like to continue monitoring the phenomena. Set up long-term recording equipment that can capture data over weeks instead of just hours. Get a complete picture of the pattern." "We can do that," Elias said. "Company will probably be willing to fund it, given the potential liability issues if there's something hazardous on our property." They spent the rest of the afternoon setting up monitoring equipment. Continuous audio and video recording, temperature sensors logging data every minute, seismographic equipment, EMF detectors. By the time they finished, Site 14B looked more like a research station than an abandoned oil well. As the sun set and darkness returned, they waited to see if the sound would start again. At 10:57 p.m. it did. One moment, silence. The next, that steady thrumming engine noise emanating from the equipment shed. The temperature sensors immediately began registering the rise in heat from the wall section. And this time, with all the monitoring equipment running, they captured something new. Dr. Kowalski was watching her laptop, which was receiving data feeds from all the sensors. Her expression changed from professional interest to confusion. "That's not right." "What?" Ryder asked. "The seismic data. When the sound started, there was a spike, a very brief spike, lasting less than a second. But it was significant, registering as equivalent to a magnitude 1.5 earthquake. Localized to this immediate area. A mini earthquake triggered the sound? Or the sound triggered a mini earthquake? Or something else triggered both?" She pulled up the waveform data. "And look at this. The spike had a specific signature, not the broad-spectrum wave pattern you'd expect from seismic activity. This is narrow band, almost like a pulse of directed energy." "From where?" Elias asked. Dr. Kowalski enhanced the data, trying to pinpoint the source. "From underground, from the chamber, or from whatever's in the chamber." Ryder felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night temperature. Something underground was producing energy pulses, Those pulses were somehow generating the sound they heard and the heat they measured. But what could do that? What could be down there, undocumented, dormant for decades, and suddenly active? "We need to see inside that chamber," Ryder said again. This time, nobody argued with him. It took 3 weeks to get the necessary permits and clearances. 3 weeks of red tape, bureaucratic delays, and frustrating conversations with various officials who didn't understand the urgency. During those 3 weeks, the sound continued every night. 11 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. like clockwork. The monitoring equipment captured it all, hundreds of hours of that steady engine thrumming, temperature fluctuations following the same pattern, seismic pulses at the start and end of each cycle. Ryder spent most nights at the site, watching, documenting, trying to understand. Elias joined him often, and Dr. Kowalski came out several times to review the data and adjust the monitoring setup. They discovered some additional details. The sound was slightly louder at certain times. Specifically, it peaked at 2:17 a.m. every night, increasing by about 3 decibels before returning to baseline. No explanation for why that specific time. The heat pattern on the wall occasionally showed internal variations, small spots that were a degree or two warmer or cooler than the rest of the hot zone. The spots would last for a few minutes, then disappear. They seemed almost random, but Dr. Kowalski thought she detected a pattern, like something scanning or pulsing within the wall cavity. The seismic data showed micropulses throughout each active period, not just at the beginning and end. Tiny energy bursts, too small to feel but detectable by instruments. They occurred at irregular intervals with no apparent pattern. And twice during those 3 weeks, something else happened. The first time was on a Friday night, around 1:45 a.m. Ryder was alone at the site, sitting in his truck with the windows down, listening to the engine sound. He'd gotten used to it by then. It had become almost background noise. The night was particularly cold, temperature having dropped into the high 30s. Ryder's breath misted in the air inside the truck cab. The stars overhead were brilliant, the Milky Way visible as a gossamer band across the sky. Everything was still, quiet, except for that persistent mechanical thrumming from the shed. Ryder had been documenting his observations in a notebook, old school, pen and paper, because he found it helped him think. He was writing down details about the sound pattern when his pen stopped working. He scribbled on the paper, trying to get the ink flowing again. But nothing. The pen was frozen, the ink apparently too cold to flow. He reached for another pen from the glove compartment. That's when the sound changed. The steady thrumming suddenly shifted pitch, going from 47 hertz up to about 52 hertz. Only for 3 seconds, then back to normal. But in those 3 seconds, Ryder felt something. A pressure in his ears like rapid altitude change. And a smell. That ozone smell, stronger than before, so strong it made his eyes water. The temperature inside the truck seemed to spike. Ryder's breath, which had been visible a moment ago, suddenly wasn't. The windows, which had been fogging slightly from his breathing, cleared instantly, and his skin prickled with static electricity. When he touched the metal door handle, a spark jumped, bright enough to see in the darkness. He grabbed his radio. "Elias, you there?" Static for a moment. Unusually loud static, crackling and popping. Then Elias's voice, groggy. "Yeah, what's up? I was sleeping." The sound changed, just for a few seconds. Did the sensors catch it? Clicking sounds as Elias checked his laptop remotely. "Yeah, I see it. 5 hertz increase, 3.2 second duration. Temperature also spiked, went up to 97 degrees briefly. What happened on your end?" "I felt something, pressure change, strong smell, like ozone or electrical burning, and the temperature jumped. It got hot in my truck for a few seconds." "Hot? You're sure?" "Yeah. went from freezing to warm, then back to cold, and there was static electricity. I got shocked touching the door handle. Elias was quiet for a moment. That's not good, Ryder. Static buildup like that, it could indicate electromagnetic activity. Strong electromagnetic fields. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. It stopped? But Ryder wasn't fine. The pressure in his ears had left him slightly dizzy, and the smell lingered in his nostrils. His hands were shaking slightly. From adrenaline, or from whatever had just happened, he couldn't tell. He got out of his truck and walked around, trying to clear his head. The desert air was shockingly cold after those few seconds of warmth. Ryder's breath misted again. He looked at the shed, which was maybe 50 yards away. In the starlight, it looked ordinary. Just a rusted metal building, unremarkable. But Ryder had the distinct impression that something had noticed him. That whatever was generating those sounds had become aware of his presence. Not just aware, interested. Like it had reached out to touch him, to test him, to see if he would react. The feeling was deeply unsettling. Ryder had spent years working alone in remote locations, had never been afraid of isolation or darkness. But this felt different. This felt like being watched by something that understood him better than he understood it. He walked a slow circuit around his truck, staying in the open, not approaching the shed. The sound had returned to its normal frequency and volume. Everything seemed ordinary again. But Ryder couldn't shake the sense that something had changed. That whatever was in that underground chamber had detected his presence and responded. The feeling passed after a few minutes, and Ryder convinced himself he was being paranoid. But he couldn't shake the unease. For the rest of that night he stayed in his truck with the doors locked, watching the shed, waiting for another change that never came. The second, unusual occurrence happened a week later. This time, Elias was at the site along with one of Dr. Kowalski's assistants, a young guy named Marcus, who was operating the monitoring equipment. At 3:33 a.m., all the sensors spiked simultaneously. Audio, temperature, seismic, everything maxed out for approximately 1 second. The engine sound became momentarily deafening. The temperature reading shot up to 127 degrees, and the seismograph registered a pulse equivalent to magnitude 2.1. Then, everything returned to normal. Marcus was frantically checking equipment, thinking something had malfunctioned. But when he reviewed the data, it was all there. A genuine, massive spike in all measured parameters, synchronized across all sensors. "What the hell was that?" Marcus said, his voice shaky. Elias was standing outside the shed, looking up at the night sky. "I don't know, but I saw something." "Saw what?" "A flash. Up there." He pointed overhead. Just for a second, the whole sky lit up like lightning, but not lightning. More like someone turned on a giant floodlight for 1 second, then turned it off. Ryder, who had been monitoring from home but was watching the data feeds on his laptop, called Elias's phone. "Did you see that spike?" "We all saw it, or felt it, or whatever." Marcus thought the equipment failed. "It didn't fail. It's all recorded. Every sensor registered the same event at the same time." "What event? What did we just witness?" "I don't know. But whatever's underground, it just did something big." After that night, they pushed harder for the excavation permits. If the underground chamber was becoming more active, they needed to know what they were dealing with sooner rather than later. Finally, on November 15th, the permits came through. A specialty excavation company out of Midland brought in equipment and a crew. Dr. Kowalski supervised, along with a safety team and a representative from the State Environmental Agency. They started digging at 8 o'clock a.m. By 3 o'clock p.m., they'd excavated a shaft down to the chamber. The vertical conduit Dr. Kowalski had detected turned out to be a metal pipe, about 6 inches in diameter, running from the chamber up to ground level. The pipe terminated in a sealed cap just below the concrete floor of the equipment shed. The chamber itself was accessible through a hatch in the top surface. The hatch was metal, corroded but intact, with a handle that turned with difficulty after decades of disuse. A camera on a cable was lowered through the hatch first. The feed displayed on a monitor showed the interior of the chamber. It was indeed roughly rectangular, maybe 8 feet by 12 feet, with smooth concrete walls. The concrete was pristine, unmarked by age or moisture damage. That was the first thing that struck Ryder as odd. After decades underground, you'd expect water staining, cracks, efflorescence from salt deposits. But these walls looked like they'd been poured yesterday. The floor was the same. Smooth concrete, perfectly level. And in the center of the chamber, mounted on a concrete pedestal that rose about 2 feet from the floor, was a device. Nobody recognized what it was. It looked vaguely like industrial equipment, metal casing, approximately 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide, with various protrusions and what might have been vents or grills. But the design was unlike anything Ryder or Elias or Dr. Kowalski had seen before. The proportions were wrong. The geometry was strange. It looked almost organic, despite being made of metal. The surfaces weren't flat or angular like manufactured equipment should be. Instead, they curved in ways that didn't quite make sense, flowing into each other with seamless transitions. There were no visible welds, no seams, no fasteners. The entire device looked like it had been cast or grown as a single piece. And it was glowing. A faint luminescence emanated from what looked like seams in the casing, though Ryder couldn't tell if they were actual seams or just patterns in the surface. Not bright, but visible even in the daylight filtering down through the open hatch. A pale blue-white color that pulsed slowly, rhythmically. The pulse rate matched the frequency of the sound they'd been hearing. 47 cycles per minute. "Is it radioactive?" someone asked. One of the excavation crew, standing well back from the opening. Dr. Kowalski checked a radiation detector, moving it around the perimeter of the hatch, then lowering it on a pole down into the chamber. "No significant radiation. Whatever that glow is, it's not ionizing radiation." "Then what is it?" Tom, the excavation supervisor, asked. "Bioluminescence?" Dr. Kowalski suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "Some organisms produce light through chemical reactions, but this is metal. It shouldn't be producing light at all." Ryder stared at the monitor, watching the device pulse in its underground chamber. The camera's microphone picked up the sound. That same mechanical thrumming they'd been hearing for weeks. But now they could see the source. The device wasn't just making sound, it was the sound. The entire casing vibrated in perfect synchronization with the audio. "Look at the pedestal," Elias said, pointing at the screen. "There's something running along the base." Dr. Kowalski zoomed the camera in. The concrete pedestal had channels carved into it, running from the base up to where the device sat. And inside those channels, something was moving. Not physically moving, more like light flowing, or liquid conducting electricity. Pale blue strands that pulsed in rhythm with the device. "Those look like conduits," Dr. Kowalski said. "Power lines or data cables. But I don't see where they lead. They just terminate at the base of the pedestal." "Could they go deeper?" Ryder asked. "Into the floor?" "Possibly. We'd need to break through the concrete to find out." The camera panned around the chamber, documenting every angle. The walls were bare except for one section near the ceiling. There, someone had carved symbols into the concrete. Not the same symbols that would later be found on the device itself. These were different. Numbers maybe, or letters in an alphabet Ryder didn't recognize. "What's that?" he asked, pointing at the screen. "Markings," Kowalski said. "Possibly a designation code or installation date. I'll photograph them once we get down there." "Someone made this chamber," Elias said quietly. "Someone dug it out, poured the concrete, installed that device, and then buried it and built an oil well site on top. That took planning, resources. Why would anyone do that?" "Maybe they weren't hiding it," Tom suggested. "Maybe they were protecting it, keeping it safe underground where nothing could damage it. Or keeping it away from where anyone could find it," Dr. Kowalski countered. "Then why build an oil well on top?" Ryder asked. "That draws attention. People come here, work here." "Maybe the well came first," Elias said. "Maybe they dug this during the operational years, when there were workers here every day. Hide your secret installation in plain sight. Nobody questions construction at an active well site." That made a disturbing kind of sense. Site 14B had been operational from 1978 to 91. 13 years when workers would have been in and out regularly. Plenty of time to excavate an underground chamber without drawing suspicion. The excavation supervisor, a grizzled guy named Tom who'd been doing this work for 20 years, stared at the monitor. "I've dug up a lot of weird shit in my career. This is in the top 5. They spent hours documenting the device with cameras from multiple angles, taking measurements, collecting air samples from the chamber. The excavation crew rigged lighting to illuminate the space better. Throughout the process, the device continued its slow, pulsing glow. And at 11 p.m., exactly on schedule, the sound started. But this time, with the chamber open to the air, they could see the correlation. When the sound began, the glow from the device brightened significantly. And looking at it through the camera feed, you could see it vibrating. Not mechanically, not like pistons or motors, more like humming. The entire casing vibrating at exactly 47 hertz. "It's the source," Kowalski said unnecessarily. "That device is generating the sound, and presumably the heat and the seismic pulses." "What is it?" Ryder asked. "Who built it? Why is it here?" "No idea, but we need to get it out of there and somewhere we can examine it properly." The excavation crew rigged a harness and carefully lifted the device out of the chamber. It was heavier than it looked. Tom estimated at least 300 pounds for something that size. The metal casing was warm to the touch but not dangerously hot. They loaded it onto a flatbed truck, covered it with a tarp, and prepared to transport it to a secure facility in Midland, where Dr. Kowalski had arranged for laboratory space. As they were securing the device for transport, Ryder noticed something. The metal casing had markings on it. Not English, not any language he recognized. Symbols, almost pictographic, arranged in precise rows. "Are those instructions?" he asked Dr. Kowalski. "If they are, I can't read them. I'll photograph them and see if any linguists can identify the script." The convoy left Site 14B around midnight. Ryder and Elias followed in Ryder's truck. The device, still glowing faintly even under its tarp, rode on the flatbed ahead of them. As they drove away from the site, Ryder looked back in his rearview mirror. The equipment shed was dark and silent now. Without the device, there was no sound, no heat, no vibrations. Whatever had been happening at Site 14B for weeks, maybe longer, had stopped. But Ryder had a feeling the mystery was just beginning. The device was housed in Dr. Kowalski's laboratory for 6 weeks, while various specialists examined it. Engineers, physicists, metallurgists, even a cryptographer to analyze the symbols on the casing. Ryder visited the lab several times during that period, watching through reinforced glass as scientists in protective gear studied something they couldn't begin to understand. What they learned. The metal was an alloy that didn't match any known composition. It contained trace elements and combinations that shouldn't be stable, shouldn't exist in nature. Analysis suggested the metal had been synthesized, possibly under extreme pressure and temperature conditions that couldn't be achieved with current human technology. One metallurgist said the atomic structure looked like it had been built molecule by molecule, assembled with precision that exceeded anything industrial processes could achieve. More disturbing were the trace isotopes, elements that shouldn't exist outside of nuclear reactions, present in minute quantities throughout the alloy. Not radioactive in dangerous amounts, but present. As if the metal itself was the byproduct of some process that didn't occur naturally on Earth. The internal mechanisms were even stranger. X-ray imaging showed components that seemed to violate basic physics. Superconducting materials operating at room temperature, something scientists had been trying to achieve for decades with limited success. Structures that looked crystalline but behaved like circuitry, conducting electricity in patterns that shifted and changed as the device operated. Energy storage systems with no apparent power source, yet maintaining charge indefinitely. One physicist spent 3 days analyzing the energy output. The device was producing more energy than it consumed, not by a huge margin, but measurably. It was violating conservation of energy, pulling power from somewhere that instruments couldn't detect. "Where's the energy coming from?" Ryder asked during one of his visits. The physicist, a woman named Dr. Hernandez, shook her head. "If I had to guess, and this is purely speculation, I'd say it's tapping into zero-point energy, the quantum vacuum. There's energy there, theoretically infinite amounts of it, but we have no idea how to access it. This device apparently does. Is that possible?" "Theoretically, yes. Practically, we don't know how. The engineering required would be centuries ahead of our current capabilities, maybe millennia." The symbols on the casing remained untranslated. Dr. Kowalski brought in 3 different cryptographers over the course of the investigation. The first said the symbols bore some superficial resemblance to various ancient writing systems, Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, but didn't match any known language. The second suggested they might be purely symbolic, not representing phonetic or written language at all, but rather mathematical relationships or physical constants. The third cryptographer spent a week analyzing the symbols and emerged with a theory that made everyone uncomfortable. "I think these aren't written language in any conventional sense," he said. "I think they're multidimensional. What we're seeing on the surface is only one aspect of the message, like looking at a 3-dimensional object from one angle. You can see it, but you're not getting the complete picture." "What would the complete picture require?" Dr. Kowalski asked. "The ability to perceive more than 3 spatial dimensions, something humans can conceptualize mathematically but can't actually see." That was when Ryder started having the dreams. They began in the 3rd week of the device's examination. Ryder would fall asleep and find himself standing in that underground chamber, but it was different, larger. The walls extended beyond what the physical chamber could contain, stretching into darkness that went on forever. And the device was active, not just glowing, but projecting. Images, or information, or something that his sleeping mind interpreted as images. He saw the device being built, not by human hands. He couldn't see the builders clearly. They were always just at the edge of his perception. Shadowy forms that moved wrong. Too many joints or not enough. But he saw them constructing the device, piece by piece, with tools that looked more like living things than machines. He saw them installing it in the chamber, saw them sealing it. And he understood, in the way you understand things in dreams, that the device was a marker, a beacon, broadcasting to something or someone saying, "We were here. We did this. remember us. But broadcasting to whom? And why bury it under an oil field in West Texas? The dreams intensified. By the fourth week, Ryder was waking up multiple times per night, disoriented, convinced he could still hear that 47 hertz thrumming even though he was miles away from the device. His coworkers noticed. His productivity slipped. He became obsessed with understanding what the device was for, checking the lab's findings daily, reading everything he could find about similar discoveries. There weren't many similar discoveries. A few reports of strange artifacts found in deep excavations, usually dismissed or covered up. One archaeologist in Peru claimed to have found a metal sphere that generated its own magnetic field. But the sphere had been confiscated by local authorities and never seen again. A construction crew in Russia supposedly unearthed a crystalline structure that emitted radio signals, but documentation was sparse and conflicting. Were those related? Were there multiple devices scattered around the world, all buried, all waiting to be found? The thought terrified and excited Ryder in equal measure. And the device continued operating. Throughout the examination period, it maintained its rhythmic glow and its vibration at 47 hertz. When external power was applied, it absorbed the energy and intensified its output, the glow brightening, the vibration becoming strong enough to rattle equipment on nearby tables. When power was removed, it continued running on its own internal energy source, apparently inexhaustible. No one could figure out how to turn it off. Dr. Kowalski and her team tried everything: electromagnetic pulses, extreme temperature changes, isolation in a Faraday cage, even complete submersion in liquid nitrogen. The device kept running, unaffected, eternal in its operation. It's designed to survive, Dr. Hernandez said. Whatever its purpose is, it's meant to keep functioning regardless of external conditions. You could probably drop it in a volcano and it would keep going. How long has it been running? Ryder asked. No way to know for sure. But given the lack of wear on the components, the unchanged energy signature, it could have been running since the day it was installed. That's 30-plus years continuously operating with no maintenance, no degradation. Or longer, someone added. The chamber wasn't built in the 90s. The construction techniques, the concrete composition, those are older. The chamber might predate the oil well by decades. Might have been there since the 50s or 60s. Or even earlier, Dr. Kowalski said quietly. We don't know when it was built. We only know when the well site was established. The device could have been there much longer, dormant, waiting. Waiting for what? Nobody had an answer to that question. After 6 weeks, government interest arrived. First as polite inquiries, then as official requests, then as demands accompanied by federal agents who packed up the device and transported it to an undisclosed location. Dr. Kowalski protested, but there was nothing she could do. The device vanished into the classified world, and all the research data was seized or classified. Ryder and Elias were interviewed separately by men in suits who asked very specific questions about what they'd seen and heard. Both were asked to sign non-disclosure agreements. Both refused. The men in suits weren't pleased, but they couldn't force the issue. There was no legal mechanism to compel NDAs for something that had been discovered on private property. So Ryder and Elias were free to talk about what they'd found. But who would believe them? An underground chamber with an impossible device that generated sound and heat without an apparent power source. That glowed with unknown energy. That bore symbols in an unidentified script. It sounded insane. Without the device as proof, without the laboratory data that had been confiscated, their story was just another strange tale from the oil fields. Something to discuss over beers, to dismiss as exaggeration or misunderstanding. Ryder went back to his regular inspection work, visiting abandoned sites, checking for problems. Every time he approached a location, Part of him wondered if he'd find another chamber, another device, another mystery. He never did. Site 14B appeared to be unique. But sometimes, late at night, Ryder would wake up hearing that sound in his memory. The steady, thrumming, 47 hertz, perfect and impossible. And he'd wonder about the device, where it was now, what it was built for, who built it and why they'd buried it under a West Texas oil field, and whether there were others like it, still buried, still running, waiting to be discovered. Elias eventually retired from the oil fields and moved to Albuquerque to be closer to his daughter. Before he left, he and Ryder met for one last drink at a bar in Midland. "You ever figure out what it was?" Ryder asked. Elias shook his head. "No, but I've got theories." "Such as?" "Well, the obvious one. Alien technology. Something left behind by visitors, buried and forgotten." "You believe that?" "I believe we found something we can't explain. Whether it's alien or just extremely advanced human technology from some classified project, does it matter? Either way, it's proof that there are things happening in this world that most people don't know about. And they want to keep it that way." "Yeah." Elias finished his beer. "But we know, Ryder. We saw it. We touched it. Whatever those government guys do with it, they can't take that away from us." They parted ways that night, and Ryder drove home alone through the dark West Texas landscape. The oil fields stretched out on either side of the highway, pumpjacks nodding in the darkness, pulling crude from ancient formations deep underground. And under some of those fields, Ryder thought, there might be other chambers, other devices, other mysteries waiting for someone to stumble across them. The thought should have scared him. Instead, it excited him, because now he knew. Now he'd seen proof that the world was stranger and more complex than he'd ever imagined, and that knowledge, that certainty, was worth more than any explanation. Ryder McLean kept working the oil fields for years after that. He never found another device like the one from Site 14B, never encountered another impossible sound or unexplained heat signature. But he kept looking, because once you've seen something that shouldn't exist, once you've touched mystery and held it in your hands, you can never go back to assuming you understand how the world works. You can only move forward, watching and waiting, hoping that maybe, just maybe, you'll get another glimpse behind the curtain. And when that happens, when the impossible becomes real again, you'll be ready. Ryder was always ready.